You know what's absolutely wild? Right now, as you're listening to this, your liver is having a conversation with your brain. Your gut is sending text messages to your heart. Your fat cells are gossiping with your muscles. And none of this requires conscious thought. Welcome to the hidden world of organ crosstalk, the secret communication network inside your body that's running 24/7 without you ever knowing it. This isn't some pseudoscience or new age wellness talk. This is cutting-edge biology that's rewriting everything we thought we knew about how our bodies work. For decades, medical students learned about organs as if they were isolated islands. Your heart pumps blood, your lungs breathe air, your kidneys filter waste. Simple, right? Except it's not simple at all. It turns out our organs are more like a group chat that never stops pinging, and the conversations they're having are absolutely fascinating. Think about the last time you got nervous before a big presentation. Your stomach felt weird, right? That wasn't just in your head. That was your brain literally talking to your gut through a dedicated communication highway called the vagus nerve. Or consider how you feel sluggish after a terrible night's sleep. That's not just tiredness. That's your brain sending distress signals to your liver, which then messes with your metabolism, which affects your muscles, which impacts your immune system. It's all connected in ways that seem almost impossibly complex. The human body contains roughly 37 trillion cells, organized into dozens of different organs and tissues. And every single one of these organs is in constant communication with the others. They're sending chemical messengers called hormones through your bloodstream. They're dispatching immune cells, like little postal workers, carrying important messages. They're even releasing tiny packages called exosomes that contain instructions written in genetic code. Your body is basically running the most sophisticated communication network in the known universe, and it's all happening inside you right now. Here's what makes this even more mind-blowing. Scientists are only just beginning to understand how deep these connections go. For years, we thought fat tissue was just storage, like a warehouse for excess calories. Turns out, fat is actually an endocrine organ that produces dozens of different hormones and actively communicates with your brain, liver, muscles, and immune system. We thought the appendix was useless. Now we know it's a safe house for good bacteria and plays a role in immune function. Every few years, researchers discover new connections between organs that completely change our understanding of health and disease. This matters for way more than just satisfying curiosity. Understanding organ crosstalk is revolutionizing medicine. Doctors are realizing that treating one organ in isolation often doesn't work because you're ignoring all the other organs that are involved in the problem. Got heart disease? Your gut bacteria might be a major contributor. Dealing with depression? Your gut-brain axis could be more important than anyone realized. Struggling with obesity? The conversation between your fat tissue, liver, and brain might be the key to understanding why diets keep failing. Tonight, we're going on a journey through your body. We're going to explore how your organs talk to each other, what they're saying, and why it matters for everything from your mood to your metabolism to your immune system. We'll look at the gut-brain axis and why your stomach has been called your second brain. We'll explore how your liver acts like a biochemical translator, turning signals from one organ into messages another organ can understand. We'll discover how your fat tissue is way smarter than anyone gave it credit for. And we'll see how your immune system acts like a communications network that connects every part of your body. This is going to be detailed, but don't worry. I'm going to explain everything in a way that makes sense. No medical degree required. Just bring your curiosity, and maybe that helps you relax and fall asleep to these wild facts about your own body. Because here's the thing, your body is performing miracles every single second, and most of us walk around completely unaware of the symphony of signals happening beneath our skin. By the end of this video, you're going to see yourself differently. You'll understand that you're not just a collection of parts. You're an integrated system where everything affects everything else. So, get comfortable. Maybe you're lying in bed right now, ready to drift off. Perfect. Let your mind wander through the inner universe of your own body as we explore one of the most fascinating topics in modern biology. let's talk about how your organs are talking to each other. Before we dive into specific organ conversations, we need to understand how cells actually talk to each other. Because when we say organs are communicating, what we really mean is that the cells in those organs are sending and receiving signals. And they've got several different methods for doing this, kind of like how you might text someone, call them, or send them a letter depending on the situation. The most direct form of cellular communication is called paracrine signaling. This is like whispering to the person next to you. A cell releases a chemical signal that only travels a short distance to affect nearby cells. This happens constantly in your tissues. For example, when you cut yourself, the damaged cells release signals that tell nearby immune cells, "Hey, we've got a problem over here." Those immune cells rush to the scene and start the healing process. It's all happening at a microscopic level, but the coordination is remarkable. Then there's endocrine signaling, which is more like broadcasting a message to everyone in the country. Your endocrine glands, like your thyroid, pancreas, and adrenal glands, release hormones into your bloodstream. These hormones travel throughout your entire body, but only cells with the right receptors can pick up the message. It's like having a radio that can only tune into specific frequencies. Your thyroid releases thyroid hormone into your blood, and it goes everywhere. But only cells with thyroid hormone receptors respond to it. This allows one organ to send messages that affect tissues throughout your entire body. There's also something called endocrine signaling, which is basically a cell talking to itself. This might sound weird, but it's actually super important. Cancer cells often use endocrine signaling to stimulate their own growth, which is part of why cancer is so hard to control. But normal cells do this too. It's a way of self-regulating and maintaining their own function. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists have discovered that cells also communicate through tiny bubbles called extracellular vesicles, or exosomes. These are like little packages that bud off from one cell and float through your bodily fluids until another cell absorbs them. Inside these packages, there's all sorts of cargo, proteins, fats, and even RNA, which is genetic material that can actually change how the receiving cell behaves. This is a relatively new discovery, and researchers are still figuring out all the ways that cells use these vesicle messages. Your nervous system represents another form of communication entirely. Neurons are specialized cells that can send electrical signals across long distances in your body. When you touch something hot, sensory neurons in your skin send an electrical signal zipping up to your spinal cord and brain at speeds over 200 miles per hour. Your brain processes this in milliseconds and sends signals back down to your muscles to pull your hand away. This is way faster than chemical signaling through the bloodstream, which is why your nervous system handles things that require quick responses. But here's what's really cool. These different communication methods often work together. Take the stress response as an example. When you perceive a threat, your brain uses electrical signals to activate your sympathetic nervous system within milliseconds. But it also triggers your adrenal glands to release hormones like cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. These hormones take a bit longer to kick in, but their effects last much longer. So you get both an immediate response and a sustained response, all from the same initial signal. That's sophisticated coordination. Cells also communicate through direct physical connections. Gap junctions are like little tunnels that connect neighboring cells, allowing them to share small molecules and electrical signals directly. Heart muscle cells use gap junctions to synchronize their contractions. That's how your heart beats as a coordinated unit rather than just a random bunch of cells twitching independently. Pretty amazing when you think about it. And we can't forget about the extracellular matrix, which is basically the scaffolding that holds your cells in place. Scientists used to think this was just structural support, but it turns out the matrix itself carries information. Cells can sense the stiffness and composition of the matrix around them, and this affects their behavior. A cell sitting on a soft matrix behaves differently than the same type of cell on a stiff matrix. This is why cancer researchers are now studying not just cancer cells themselves, but also the tissue environment around them. The key takeaway here is that cellular communication is incredibly diverse and sophisticated. Your cells aren't just blasting out random signals. They're having specific conversations using multiple languages simultaneously. And when we zoom out from individual cells to whole organs, These communication networks become even more complex and fascinating. Every organ is both sending and receiving countless signals, and the result is the integrated functioning of your entire body. It's coordination on a scale that makes the internet look simple by comparison. Let's start with probably the most talked about example of organ crosstalk, the gut-brain axis. This is the two-way communication superhighway between your digestive system and your brain, and it's way more important than most people realize. In fact, your gut is sometimes called your second brain, and that's not just a catchy phrase. There's real science behind it. Your gut contains something called the enteric nervous system, which is a massive network of neurons embedded in the lining of your digestive tract. We're talking about 200 to 600 million neurons here, which is more than you have in your spinal cord. These neurons can operate independently of your brain, controlling digestion, gut movement, and secretion of digestive juices all on their own. If you completely severed the connection between your gut and brain, your digestive system would keep working. It's got its own intelligence. But of course, your gut and brain are intimately connected, primarily through the vagus nerve. This is the longest nerve in your body, wandering from your brainstem all the way down through your chest and into your abdomen. About 90% of the signals traveling along the vagus nerve go from your gut to your brain, not the other way around. Read that again. Your gut sends way more information to your brain than your brain sends to your gut. Your digestive system is constantly updating your brain about what's happening down there. What kind of information is your gut sending? All sorts of things. It's reporting on the nutrients you've consumed, the presence of harmful bacteria or toxins, the state of your gut lining, inflammation levels, and even the composition of your gut microbiome. Your brain uses this information to regulate appetite, mood, stress responses, and even decision-making. This is why you get gut feelings about things. Your brain is literally receiving emotional signals from your digestive tract. The gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in your intestines, plays a huge role in this communication. These bacteria produce neurotransmitters, the same chemical messengers your brain uses. Your gut bacteria produce dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, which are all involved in mood regulation. In fact, about 95% of your body's serotonin is produced in your gut, not your brain. When scientists talk about the gut-brain axis, they're really talking about a three-way conversation between your brain, your gut, and your microbiome. Research has shown that changing your gut bacteria can actually change your behavior and mood. In one famous experiment, scientists took gut bacteria from anxious mice and transplanted them into calm mice. The previously calm mice started acting anxious. The reverse was also true. Bacteria from calm mice could reduce anxiety in anxious mice. This has huge implications for mental health. We're now seeing evidence that gut bacteria might play a role in depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorders, and even neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. The gut-brain axis also helps explain why stress messes with your digestion. When your brain perceives stress, it sends signals down to your gut that can slow digestion, change gut permeability, alter the balance of gut bacteria, and trigger inflammation. This is why people with chronic stress often develop digestive issues like irritable bowel syndrome. The stress isn't just in their head, it's creating real physical changes in their gut through the gut-brain axis. And the communication goes the other way too. Inflammation in your gut can send signals to your brain that trigger anxiety and depression. People with inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis have much higher rates of depression and anxiety. And this isn't just because dealing with a chronic illness is hard. The inflammatory signals from their gut are directly affecting their brain chemistry and mood. Your gut also communicates with your brain through hormones. The cells lining your intestines produce dozens of different hormones that regulate appetite, metabolism, and even social behavior. Peptide YY and GLP-1 are gut hormones that tell your brain you're full. Ghrelin is produced in your stomach and tells your brain you're hungry. These hormones travel through your bloodstream to reach your brain, and they're crucial for regulating how much you eat. Recent research has even found that your gut microbiome can influence your food cravings. Certain bacteria prefer certain types of food, and they can actually manipulate your cravings to get more of what they want. If you're ever wondered why you suddenly crave chocolate or bread, it might not be entirely your choice. Your gut bacteria might be influencing your desires. It's a bit unsettling when you think about it, but it also opens up possibilities for treating food addiction and obesity by modifying gut bacteria. The gut-brain axis is so important that it's changing how we think about treating mental health conditions. Psychiatrists are starting to ask about digestive health. Gastroenterologists are asking about mood. Some researchers think the next generation of antidepressants might actually be probiotics, beneficial bacteria that can improve mood by changing gut-brain communication. We're at the beginning of a revolution in understanding how our guts and brains work together. If your gut and brain are in constant conversation, your liver is like the interpreter, translator, and air traffic controller all rolled into one. The liver is absolutely central to organ crosstalk because almost everything you consume or produce passes through it, and it has the job of deciding what to do with all those different signals and substances. It's one of the most metabolically active organs in your body, and it's talking to basically every other organ system simultaneously. Your liver weighs about 3 pounds and sits in your upper right abdomen, tucked under your rib cage. It's the largest internal organ you have, and it performs over 500 different functions. That's not an exaggeration. Researchers have documented hundreds of distinct biochemical processes that happen in your liver. It's a chemical factory running 24/7, and one of its main jobs is facilitating communication between different organs. Here's how that works. When your intestines absorb nutrients from food, all that blood flows directly to your liver before going anywhere else. This is called the hepatic portal system, and it's a brilliant design. Your liver gets first dibs on everything coming from your digestive system. It screens for toxins, processes nutrients, and decides what to store, what to modify, and what to release back into the bloodstream for other organs to use. It's quality control for your entire body. Let's say you eat a meal high in carbohydrates. Your intestines break down those carbs into glucose and absorb it into your bloodstream. That glucose-rich blood flows straight to your liver. Your liver senses the high glucose levels and starts a complex signaling cascade. It stores some of that glucose as glycogen for later use. It might convert some into fat if your glycogen stores are full. And it releases insulin-regulating signals that help your pancreas know how much insulin to produce. Your liver is essentially translating the message, "We just ate carbs," into instructions that your pancreas, muscles, fat tissue, and brain can all understand and respond to. Your liver also produces bile, which is crucial for digesting fats. But bile isn't just a digestive fluid. It also carries signals. Bile acids can act as hormones that communicate with your gut, your brain, and your immune system. Recent research has shown that bile acids can actually affect your mood and metabolism by binding to receptors throughout your body. This was a surprise to researchers who thought bile was just about breaking down fats in your diet. The liver is the main site of protein synthesis in your body. It produces most of the proteins in your blood plasma, including albumin, which maintains blood pressure, and clotting factors, which stop you from bleeding to death when you get cut. But it also produces signaling proteins that carry messages between organs. Insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, is made by your liver in response to growth hormone from your pituitary gland. IGF-1 then travels throughout your body, telling your bones to grow, your muscles to develop, and your cells to divide. Your liver is taking one signal from your brain and amplifying it into a body-wide message. Your liver also plays a central role in the crosstalk between your fat tissue and your muscles. When you exercise, your muscles release chemical signals asking for more fuel. Your liver responds by breaking down stored glycogen into glucose and releasing it into your bloodstream. If you've been exercising long enough that your glycogen stores are depleted, your liver can actually make new glucose from scratch using amino acids and other precursors. This process is called gluconeogenesis, and it's how your body maintains blood sugar during fasting or prolonged exercise. Your liver is listening to signals from your muscles and responding accordingly. Fat tissue also talks to your liver constantly. Your fat cells produce hormones like leptin and adiponectin that travel to your liver and affect how it metabolizes fats and carbohydrates. When you gain weight, your fat cells produce more leptin, which tells your liver and your brain that you have plenty of energy stored. Your liver responds by changing its metabolic programs. But in obesity, this signaling can get disrupted. Your liver might stop responding to leptin properly, which contributes to metabolic dysfunction. The conversation between fat and liver gets garbled, and health problems follow. The liver is also crucial for detoxification, which is really another form of crosstalk. Your kidneys, lungs, skin, and intestines all produce waste products and toxins that need to be neutralized. These substances travel through your blood to your liver, which has specialized enzymes that can break them down into less harmful forms. Your liver is constantly receiving chemical messages about what toxins are present in your body and responding by producing the right enzymes to deal with them. It's an adaptive system that can ramp up production of specific detox enzymes when needed. When your liver gets damaged, say from alcohol abuse or fatty liver disease, this whole communication network gets disrupted. Your liver stops translating signals properly. Messages get lost or misinterpreted. Other organs don't get the information they need. This is why liver disease affects every system in your body, not just your digestive system. The master regulator isn't working right. For most of human history, we thought fat was just storage. You eat more calories than you burn, the excess gets packed away in your adipose tissue, your fat cells, and that's basically it. Fat was considered passive, inert, just sitting there waiting to be used when food got scarce. But over the last few decades, researchers have discovered that fat tissue is actually an incredibly active endocrine organ that produces dozens of different hormones and signaling molecules. Your fat is talking to your brain, your liver, your muscles, your immune system, and pretty much every other organ in your body. The discovery that really changed everything was leptin, back in 1994. Leptin is a hormone produced by your fat cells, and its main job is telling your brain how much energy you have stored. When your fat cells are full, they produce more leptin. This leptin travels through your bloodstream to your hypothalamus, which is the appetite control center in your brain. The message is basically, we have plenty of fuel stored, you can ease up on the eating. When your fat stores shrink, leptin levels drop, and your brain gets the message, we're running low on reserves, time to eat more. This was revolutionary because it showed that fat tissue wasn't passive. It was actively participating in regulating your appetite and metabolism. But here's where it gets complicated. In people with obesity, leptin signaling often doesn't work properly. They have high levels of leptin because they have a lot of fat tissue producing it, but their brains become resistant to the signal. It's called leptin resistance, and it's similar to insulin resistance in type 2 diabetes. The message is being sent, but the receiver isn't picking it up properly. Your fat is screaming, "We have enough energy!" But your brain can't hear it, so you keep feeling hungry, even though you have plenty of stored energy. Fat tissue also produces adiponectin, which is fascinating because it's one of the few hormones that decreases when you gain weight. Adiponectin makes your liver and muscles more sensitive to insulin, reduces inflammation, and protects your heart. When you're lean and healthy, you have high adiponectin levels, but as you gain fat, especially visceral fat around your organs, adiponectin drops. This is one reason why obesity increases the risk of diabetes and heart disease. You're losing a protective hormone while simultaneously gaining inflammatory signals. And that brings us to the inflammatory side of fat tissue. When fat cells get overstuffed with lipids, they start producing inflammatory molecules called cytokines. The main culprits are TNF-alpha and IL-6, which are normally produced by immune cells during infections. But in obesity, your fat tissue starts pumping out these inflammatory signals chronically. This creates a state of low-grade inflammation throughout your entire body, and inflammation is at the root of most chronic diseases: diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, you name it. Your fat tissue is also in constant conversation with your muscles. Fat cells produce a molecule called retinol binding protein 4, or RBP4, that can travel to your muscles and make them less sensitive to insulin. This means your muscles don't take up glucose from your bloodstream as effectively, which leads to higher blood sugar levels. At the same time, muscles produce a hormone called irisin during exercise, and irisin can travel to your fat tissue and tell it to burn more energy as heat. So, there's this back and forth conversation between fat and muscle about energy usage and metabolism. Different fat deposits in your body send different signals. Subcutaneous fat, the fat under your skin, is relatively quiet metabolically. It stores energy and produces some hormones, but it's not particularly inflammatory. Visceral fat, the fat around your internal organs, is much more active and much more harmful. Visceral fat produces higher levels of inflammatory cytokines and free fatty acids that flow directly to your liver through the portal vein. This is why having a lot of belly fat is more dangerous for your health than having fat on your thighs or hips. The location of your fat determines what kind of signals it's sending. Recent research has discovered that fat tissue even communicates with your brain about reproduction. Leptin is required for normal puberty and fertility. When leptin levels are too low, like in people with very low body fat or eating disorders, reproductive hormones shut down. This makes evolutionary sense. If your body doesn't have enough energy reserves, it's not a good time to support a pregnancy. Your fat tissue is literally telling your brain whether you have enough resources to reproduce. Brown fat is a special type of fat tissue that's particularly good at crosstalk. Unlike white fat, which stores energy, brown fat burns energy to produce heat. Babies have a lot of brown fat to stay warm, and we used to think adults didn't have much. But recent imaging studies have shown that adults do have active brown fat, especially around the neck and spine. And brown fat produces hormones called beta-kines that can improve metabolism in other organs. When brown fat is active, it releases signals that make your muscles burn more fat, make your liver more insulin sensitive, and even promote the browning of white fat. Your heart and kidneys are in one of the most critical partnerships in your body. They depend on each other so much that when one starts failing, the other almost inevitably follows. Cardiologists have a name for this: the cardiorenal syndrome. It's a vicious cycle where heart problems cause kidney problems, which cause worse heart problems, which cause worse kidney problems. Understanding this crosstalk is crucial for treating millions of people with heart disease and kidney disease. Let's start with how your heart talks to your kidneys. Your heart's primary job is pumping blood, and about 20% of the blood your heart pumps with each beat goes straight to your kidneys. That's a huge proportion, considering your kidneys only weigh about half a pound combined. They need this massive blood flow because they're filtering your entire blood volume dozens of times per day, removing waste products and excess water while keeping good stuff like proteins and blood cells. When your heart isn't pumping effectively, like in heart failure, your kidneys receive less blood flow. They sense this reduced flow and interpret it as a sign that your body is dehydrated or low on blood volume. So they respond by activating a hormone system called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS for short. This system tells your kidneys to hold on to more salt and water to increase blood volume. The kidneys are trying to help, but in heart failure, this actually makes things worse because the heart is already struggling to pump the blood it has. Adding more fluid just increases the workload on an already failing heart. Your kidneys also communicate with your heart through blood pressure regulation. When your kidneys sense low blood flow, they release renin, which triggers a cascade that produces angiotensin Stu. This is a powerful hormone that constricts your blood vessels, raising blood pressure. Again, this makes sense if you're actually dehydrated or bleeding. But if your kidneys are activating the system inappropriately, like in chronic kidney disease, you end up with high blood pressure that forces your heart to work harder. Over time, this can lead to the heart muscle thickening and stiffening, which is called cardiac hypertrophy. Your heart fights back though. When the heart muscle stretches because it's overfilled with blood, special cells release hormones called natriuretic peptides, specifically ANP and BNP. These hormones travel to your kidneys and tell them to excrete more salt and water. They also tell your blood vessels to relax, lowering blood pressure. It's the heart's way of saying, "Hey, we're overwhelmed down here. Can you help us out by getting rid of some fluid?" Doctors actually measure BNP levels in the blood to diagnose heart failure. If your heart is making a lot of BNP, it's a sign that it's struggling. But the heart-kidney crosstalk gets even more complex. Your kidneys are the main site of erythropoietin production. This is a hormone that tells your bone marrow to make more red blood cells. When your kidneys are damaged and don't produce enough erythropoietin, you become anemic. And anemia makes your heart work harder because there's less oxygen carrying capacity in your blood. So kidney disease leads to anemia, which stresses the heart, which can worsen kidney blood flow. Another vicious cycle. Your kidneys also regulate the balance of electrolytes in your blood: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphate. These electrolytes are crucial for your heart's electrical system. Your heartbeat is controlled by electrical impulses, and those impulses depend on precise movements of sodium, potassium, and calcium ions across heart cell membranes. When your kidneys aren't working properly and electrolytes get out of balance, your heart's electrical system can go haywire. This is why people with kidney disease are at high risk for dangerous heart rhythm abnormalities called arrhythmias. Chronic kidney disease also leads to calcification of blood vessels and heart valves. This happens because damaged kidneys can't properly regulate calcium and phosphate levels. When phosphate builds up in the blood, it binds with calcium and forms deposits in your arteries and heart valves, making them stiff and narrow. This accelerates atherosclerosis and can cause heart valves to malfunction. The kidney's inability to maintain mineral balance directly damages the heart. There's also an inflammatory connection between the heart and kidneys. When kidneys are diseased, they produce inflammatory cytokines that circulate throughout the body and promote inflammation in the heart muscle and blood vessels. Similarly, heart failure creates congestion that backs up into the veins, including the renal veins draining the kidneys. This venous congestion increases pressure in the kidneys and triggers inflammatory responses that damage kidney tissue. Recent research has uncovered that the heart and kidneys also communicate through the nervous system. Your kidneys have sympathetic nerves, the fight or flight system, that can become overactive in kidney disease. This overactivity sends signals that increase heart rate and blood pressure, further stressing the heart. Some new treatments for resistant high blood pressure actually involve ablating these kidney nerves to break the cycle of overactivation. The interdependence of the heart and kidneys is why doctors now think of cardiovascular disease and kidney disease as two sides of the same coin. Treating one requires considering the other. Blood pressure medications that help the heart might also protect the kidneys. Diabetes medications that protect the kidneys also reduce heart failure risk. The crosstalk between these two organs is so profound that medicine is moving toward treating them as an integrated system, rather than something that might surprise you. Your muscles and bones are in constant conversation, and this communication is crucial for maintaining both muscle strength and bone density as you age. For a long time, we thought the relationship was simple. Muscles pull on bones to create movement, and that mechanical stress stimulates bones to stay strong. That's true, but it's only a tiny part of the story. Your muscles and bones are actually endocrine organs that produce hormones to talk to each other. When you exercise, your muscles don't just contract, they secrete molecules called myokines. These are signaling proteins that travel through your bloodstream and affect tissues throughout your body, including your bones. One of the most important myokines is irisin, which is released during exercise and promotes bone formation. Irisin travels to your bones and stimulates cells called osteoblasts, which build new bone tissue. This is one reason why resistance training is so effective at preventing osteoporosis. You're not just mechanically stressing the bone, your muscles are chemically signaling the bone to get stronger. Another important myokine is interleukin-6, or IL-6. Now, IL-6 has a complicated reputation because it can be inflammatory in certain contexts. But when muscles release it during exercise, it actually has beneficial effects. Exercise-induced IL-6 helps regulate metabolism and stimulates bone remodeling. The same molecule can have different effects depending on where it comes from and when it's released. Context matters in organ crosstalk. Your bones talk back to your muscles too. Bone tissue produces a hormone called osteocalcin, which has some remarkable effects. Osteocalcin travels to your muscles and improves their ability to take up glucose and generate energy. It basically makes your muscles work better. Researchers have found that mice lacking osteocalcin have weaker muscles with less endurance. And here's the kicker. Osteocalcin doesn't just affect muscles. It also travels to your brain and improves memory and learning. Your skeleton is literally influencing your cognitive function. This might seem bizarre, but it makes evolutionary sense. Strong bones and strong muscles and a sharp brain all go together for survival. Our ancestors needed all three to hunt, gather, and escape from predators. The organs involved in these functions evolved to coordinate with each other through chemical signaling. Your body is still running these ancient programs. Bone also produces another interesting hormone called FGF23, which regulates phosphate and vitamin D metabolism. But FGF23 also affects muscle function. High levels of FGF23, which occur in chronic kidney disease, can cause muscle weakness and atrophy. Scientists are still figuring out exactly how this works, but it's another example of bones sending signals that affect muscle health. The mechanical aspect of muscle-bone crosstalk is still super important, though. When muscles contract, they create forces that pull on bones. Bones have special cells called osteocytes embedded in the bone matrix, and these cells can sense mechanical strain. When osteocytes detect that a bone is being stressed by muscle contractions, they coordinate a remodeling response, breaking down old bone and building new, stronger bone in response to the loads it's experiencing. This is why astronauts lose bone density in space. Without gravity creating loads on their bones, the osteocytes don't receive signals to maintain bone strength. But here's where it gets really interesting. Osteocytes can also sense when bones aren't being loaded enough, and they signal this to muscles. Recent research suggests that bones might be telling muscles to stay active to maintain the mechanical stimulation bones need. It's a feedback loop. Muscles tell bones to get stronger through mechanical and chemical signals, and bones tell muscles to stay active to keep providing those signals. The muscle-bone crosstalk also involves your fat tissue and hormones. We've already talked about how fat produces leptin and adiponectin, but these hormones also affect both muscle and bone. Leptin generally promotes bone formation, but can cause muscle insulin resistance in high amounts. Adiponectin improves muscle function and protects against muscle loss, so your fat tissue is participating in the three-way conversation between muscle, bone, and metabolic health. Sex hormones are another part of this communication network. Testosterone and estrogen are crucial for maintaining both muscle mass and bone density. When these hormones decline with aging, especially estrogen in women after menopause, both muscles and bones suffer. Estrogen receptors are present in both muscle and bone cells, and estrogen directly stimulates bone formation while helping maintain muscle mass. The drop in estrogen is a major reason why older women are at high risk for both osteoporosis and sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss. Vitamin D is also a key player in muscle-bone crosstalk. We usually think of vitamin D as the bone vitamin, but it's actually crucial for muscle function too. Muscle cells have vitamin D receptors, and vitamin D deficiency causes muscle weakness, pain, and increased fall risk. This is why vitamin D status is so important for preventing fractures. It affects both the bone that might break and the muscles that might prevent the fall in the first place. The practical implications of understanding muscle-bone crosstalk are huge. We now know that the best way to maintain both muscle and bone health is not just calcium supplements or protein shakes, it's exercise, particularly resistance training that loads both muscles and bones. Let's talk about one of the most important communication triangles in your body, the relationship between your pancreas, liver, and muscles in regulating blood sugar. This is the core of metabolic health, and when this crosstalk breaks down, you get insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Understanding how these three organs communicate is key to understanding metabolism and energy regulation. Your pancreas is tucked behind your stomach, and it has a crucial job, producing insulin and glucagon, the two main hormones that control blood sugar. When you eat a meal and glucose enters your bloodstream, beta cells in your pancreas sense the rising glucose and release insulin. Insulin is like a key that unlocks cells throughout your body, allowing them to absorb glucose from the blood. Without insulin, glucose just accumulates in your bloodstream because it can't get into cells where it's needed. When insulin is released into your bloodstream, it travels to your liver, muscles, and fat tissue, the main sites of glucose disposal. Each of these organs has insulin receptors on their cells, and when insulin binds to these receptors, it triggers a cascade of signals inside the cell that ultimately moves glucose transporters to the cell surface. These transporters are like doors that allow glucose to enter the cell. Your liver is especially responsive to insulin. When insulin levels are high after a meal, your liver gets the message to stop producing its own glucose and start storing the glucose coming from your intestines instead. Your liver can store glucose by converting it to glycogen, which is basically a branched chain of glucose molecules all stuck together. An adult liver can store about 100 grams of glycogen, which represents maybe 400 calories worth of quick energy. Once the glycogen stores are full, your liver starts converting excess glucose into fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. Your muscles also respond to insulin by taking up glucose from the blood. But muscles work a bit differently than the liver. Muscle cells can store glucose as glycogen just like the liver, but they can also burn glucose immediately for energy if you're active. Your muscles can store more total glycogen than your liver, maybe 300 to 600 grams depending on how much muscle mass you have. But there's a key difference. Muscle glycogen can only be used by the muscle itself. Your muscles can't release glucose back into the bloodstream like your liver can. This brings us to the flip side of the pancreas-liver-muscle communication. What happens when blood sugar drops? Between meals, or during exercise, or while you're sleeping, your blood glucose starts to fall. Your pancreas senses this and reduces insulin secretion while ramping up production of glucagon, which is basically the opposite of insulin. Glucagon travels to your liver and tells it to start breaking down glycogen and releasing glucose back into your bloodstream. If you haven't eaten in a while, and glycogen stores are depleted, your liver can even make new glucose from amino acids and other precursors through gluconeogenesis. Your muscles are also communicating with your liver during exercise. When you're working out, your muscles are burning through glucose rapidly. They send out signals, including myokines like IL-6, that travel to your liver and basically say, "Hey, we need more fuel over here." Your liver responds by increasing glucose output to maintain blood sugar and provide energy for the working muscles. This happens even though insulin levels drop during exercise. Your muscles become more sensitive to insulin during physical activity, so they can take up glucose effectively even with lower insulin levels. Now here's where things can go wrong. If you consistently eat too much and don't exercise enough, your cells start to ignore insulin signals. This is called insulin resistance. Your pancreas detects that insulin isn't working properly, so it makes even more insulin to try to force glucose into cells. For a while, this compensates and blood sugar stays normal. But your pancreas is working overtime, and eventually the beta cells start to wear out. They can't produce enough insulin to overcome the resistance, and blood sugar starts to rise. This is the path to type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance doesn't affect all organs equally. Your liver often becomes resistant first. When your liver is insulin resistant, it doesn't properly shut down glucose production after meals. So you have glucose coming in from food and glucose still being produced by your liver, leading to higher blood sugar spikes. At the same time, insulin-resistant liver starts accumulating fat. This is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it further worsens insulin resistance. Another vicious cycle. Your muscles also become insulin resistant, but they can compensate to some degree through exercise. When you contract your muscles during exercise, glucose transporters move to the cell surface even without insulin. This is why physical activity is so effective at improving blood sugar control. It bypasses insulin resistance and allows muscles to take up glucose anyway. Regular exercise also improves insulin sensitivity over time, meaning your cells respond better to normal insulin levels. The communication between your pancreas, liver, and muscles involves other players too. Your fat tissue produces hormones that affect insulin sensitivity. Your gut releases hormones called incretins that amplify insulin secretion after meals. Your brain monitors blood glucose and sends signals that affect liver glucose production. We usually think of the immune system as defending against infections, and that's definitely true. But your immune system is also one of the most sophisticated communication networks in your body, connecting every organ and tissue through a constant exchange of signals. Immune cells are like roaming messengers carrying information about the state of your body, and they influence everything from metabolism to mood to wound healing. Let's start with the basics. Your immune system consists of millions of white blood cells constantly circulating through your bloodstream and tissues. These aren't just sitting around waiting for an infection. They're actively surveying every part of your body, checking for problems, and communicating with the cells around them. It's like having millions of scouts constantly radioing back to headquarters with the status reports. One of the main ways immune cells communicate is through cytokines. These are small proteins that act as signaling molecules between cells. There are dozens of different cytokines, each with specific effects. Some are pro-inflammatory, ramping up immune responses. Others are anti-inflammatory, calming things down. Some recruit more immune cells to a site of injury or infection. Others regulate cell growth and differentiation. Cytokines are basically the vocabulary of the immune system. Here's what's fascinating. Organs throughout your body can release cytokines to communicate with the immune system, and immune cells can release cytokines that affect how those organs function. It's a two-way conversation. For example, your fat tissue releases inflammatory cytokines when you're overweight, and these signals activate immune cells. Those immune cells then infiltrate your fat tissue and release more inflammatory signals, which worsens insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. Your fat and your immune system are locked in a destructive conversation. Your brain also talks extensively with your immune system. When immune cells detect an infection, they release cytokines like IL-1, IL-6, and TNF-alpha. These cytokines can cross the blood-brain barrier or signal through nerve pathways to reach your brain. Once there, they trigger what's called sickness behavior. You feel tired, lose your appetite, want to stay in bed, and feel generally lousy. This isn't just a side effect of being sick. It's a coordinated response where your immune system is telling your brain to change your behavior to focus energy on fighting the infection. But chronic inflammation can lead to these cytokines signaling the brain inappropriately. This is one reason why inflammation is linked to depression. When inflammatory cytokines are constantly elevated, they can disrupt neurotransmitter metabolism in the brain and promote depressive symptoms. Some researchers now think of certain types of depression as inflammatory disorders, where the immune system is sending the wrong signals to the brain. Your gut immune system deserves special mention because it's the largest immune organ in your body. About 70% of your immune cells reside in and around your intestines. This makes sense because your gut is constantly exposed to foreign material, food, bacteria, potential pathogens. Your gut immune system has to distinguish between helpful bacteria that should be tolerated and harmful pathogens that should be attacked. It's a delicate balance, and the gut immune system is in constant communication with your gut bacteria, your intestinal lining, and immune organs throughout your body. When your gut immune system detects a problem, say a harmful pathogen or a breach in the gut barrier, it releases inflammatory cytokines that can circulate throughout your body. This is why gut inflammation can cause systemic effects. Inflammatory bowel diseases, like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, don't just cause digestive symptoms. They are associated with joint pain, skin problems, liver inflammation, and increased risk of blood clots. The inflammatory signals from the gut immune system are affecting organs throughout the body. Your bone marrow is the factory where most immune cells are produced, and it's also in constant communication with the rest of your body about what kind of immune cells are needed. When you have an infection, signals from the site of infection travel back to the bone marrow and tell it to produce more neutrophils, which are the first responders to bacterial infections. When you have allergies, signals stimulate production of eosinophils, which fight parasites and contribute to allergic reactions. Your bone marrow is responding to systemic signals about what threats your body is facing. The spleen acts like a filter and meeting place for immune cells. Blood constantly flows through your spleen, and immune cells there can sample what's in the blood and respond accordingly. If they detect fragments of bacteria or abnormal cells, they activate and coordinate a response. The spleen also stores platelets and can release them into circulation when needed. It's a communication hub for the immune system. Your lymph nodes are another communication hub. Fluid constantly drains from your tissues into lymphatic vessels, carrying debris, proteins, and immune cells to lymph nodes. In the lymph nodes, different types of immune cells interact with each other and with any foreign material that's been drained from the tissues. This is where T cells and B cells get activated and coordinated. When you have an infection, the lymph nodes near the infection swell because they're full of immune cells communicating and multiplying to mount a response. Your thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland in your neck, and despite weighing less than an ounce, It controls the metabolic rate of virtually every cell in your body. Thyroid hormones are master regulators that set the pace of cellular activity, and the thyroid communicates with every organ system through a carefully controlled hormone cascade. When thyroid function goes wrong, the effects ripple throughout your entire body because every organ depends on receiving the right thyroid signals. The thyroid produces two main hormones, T4, which is thyroxine, and T3, which is triiodothyronine. About 90% of what your thyroid releases is T4, but T3 is actually the more active form. Tissues throughout your body have enzymes that convert T4 to T3 as needed, which provides local control over thyroid hormone activity. It's a clever system. Your thyroid produces a relatively stable amount of the pro-hormone T4, and individual organs can regulate how much active T3 they generate based on their needs. Thyroid hormone production is controlled by your hypothalamus and pituitary gland in your brain. Your hypothalamus releases TRH, which tells your pituitary to release TSH, which then tells your thyroid to produce T4 and T3. This is called the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, or HPT axis. It's a communication chain from your brain to your thyroid, and there's feedback in the other direction too. When T4 and T3 levels rise in your blood, they signal back to your pituitary and hypothalamus to reduce TRH and TSH production. This creates a feedback loop that keeps thyroid hormones stable. But the interesting crosstalk happens when thyroid hormones reach target tissues. Virtually every cell in your body has thyroid hormone receptors, and when thyroid hormone binds to these receptors, it enters the cell nucleus and changes gene expression. Thyroid hormones literally turn genes on and off, changing what proteins the cell produces. This is how thyroid hormones control metabolism. They alter the molecular machinery of cells. Let's start with your heart. Thyroid hormones make your heart beat faster and more forcefully. They increase your heart's sensitivity to adrenaline, upregulate calcium channels that control heart muscle contraction, and increase the number of beta-adrenergic receptors on heart cells. People with hyperthyroidism, too much thyroid hormone, often have rapid heart rate, heart palpitations, and even atrial fibrillation. Their heart is being overstimulated by excessive thyroid signaling. Conversely, hypothyroidism can cause slow heart rate and reduced cardiac output. Your metabolism is fundamentally controlled by thyroid hormones. T3 enters cells throughout your body and increases the activity of mitochondria, which are the energy-producing structures in cells. Thyroid hormones increase oxygen consumption and heat production, which is why your metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn calories, is directly linked to thyroid function. People with hypothyroidism often lose weight despite eating more because their metabolic rate is cranked up. People with hypothyroidism gain weight and feel cold because their metabolic rate is sluggish. Thyroid hormones also communicate extensively with your brain. During development, thyroid hormones are absolutely critical for brain maturation. Babies born with severe hypothyroidism will have permanent intellectual disability if not treated immediately. This is why newborns are screened for thyroid function. Catching it early prevents devastating consequences. Even in adults, thyroid hormones affect mood, memory, and cognition. Hypothyroidism commonly causes depression, brain fog, and slowed thinking. The brain needs adequate thyroid signaling to function properly. Your liver responds to thyroid hormones by changing its metabolic programs. Thyroid hormones increase the expression of genes involved in glucose metabolism, cholesterol synthesis, and protein production. This is why thyroid function affects cholesterol levels. People with hypothyroidism often have high cholesterol because their liver isn't metabolizing cholesterol properly without adequate thyroid signaling. Muscle function also depends on thyroid hormones. T3 increases the expression of contractile proteins in muscle fibers and affects muscle energy metabolism. Hypothyroidism causes muscle weakness, cramps, and stiffness. Muscles literally don't work as well without proper thyroid signaling. Hypothyroidism can cause muscle wasting because the accelerated metabolism breaks down muscle proteins faster than they can be rebuilt. Your bones are another target of thyroid signaling. Thyroid hormones stimulate bone remodeling, the constant process of breaking down old bone and building new bone. In hyperthyroidism, bone remodeling accelerates, but breakdown outpaces formation, leading to bone loss and increased fracture risk. This is another example of too much of a good thing becoming harmful. The gastrointestinal system responds to thyroid hormones by changing its motility, the speed at which food moves through your digestive tract. Hyperthyroidism speeds up gut motility, often causing diarrhea. Hypothyroidism slows it down, causing constipation. Thyroid hormones are regulating the smooth muscle contractions that propel food through your intestines. Your reproductive system also communicates with your thyroid. Thyroid hormones affect the production and metabolism of sex hormones. Women with thyroid disorders often have menstrual irregularities and fertility problems. During pregnancy, thyroid hormone needs increase because the developing fetus depends on the mother's thyroid hormones until its own thyroid gland matures. The placenta even produces a hormone that mimics TSH to stimulate the mother's thyroid to produce more hormone. What's remarkable is that all these effects on your heart, metabolism, brain, liver, muscles, bones, gut, and reproductive system come from a single gland producing just 2 hormones. The widespread influence of thyroid hormones demonstrates how crucial hormone crosstalk is for coordinating communication body function that most people never think about, but it's absolutely vital for life. The crosstalk between your kidneys, bones, and parathyroid glands that regulates calcium and phosphate in your blood. This might sound boring, but calcium regulation is crucial for everything from muscle contraction to nerve signaling to blood clotting. And the conversation between these 3 organs is elegantly complex. Your parathyroid glands are 4 tiny glands, each about the size of a grain of rice, embedded in your thyroid gland. Despite their small size, they're crucial for survival. They produce parathyroid hormone, or PTH, which is the main regulator of blood calcium levels. Your body monitors calcium concentration very precisely. It needs to be between 8.5 and 10.5 milligrams per deciliter. Go outside that narrow range, and you can have serious problems with heart rhythm, muscle function, and nerve signaling. When blood calcium drops even slightly, your parathyroid glands sense it within seconds and release PTH. This hormone then travels to 3 main targets: your bones, kidneys, and intestines. At each target, PTH sends specific instructions about how to raise blood calcium. It's a coordinated response involving multiple organs. In your bones, PTH stimulates cells called osteoclasts, which break down bone tissue and release calcium into your bloodstream. This is your body's calcium bank. About 99% of your body's calcium is stored in your skeleton. When blood calcium drops, PTH tells your bones to make a withdrawal from the calcium bank. This works great as a short-term solution, but if PTH is constantly elevated, your bones get depleted and you develop osteoporosis. In your kidneys, PTH has 2 main effects. First, it tells your kidneys to reabsorb more calcium from the fluid that's being filtered to make urine. Normally, your kidneys filter calcium and then reabsorb most of it back into your blood, but some gets lost in urine. PTH reduces this loss by increasing reabsorption. Second, PTH tells your kidneys to produce the active form of vitamin D, which is called calcitriol. This is a crucial step because vitamin D is actually a hormone, and your kidneys are the final processing plant that activates it. Calcitriol then travels to your intestines and tells them to absorb more calcium from the food you eat. It upregulates calcium transport proteins in your intestinal cells, making them better at pulling calcium from your diet into your bloodstream. So PTH indirectly increases calcium absorption by stimulating vitamin D activation in your kidneys, which then signals your intestines. It's a 3-organ communication chain. But wait, there's more. Your kidneys also regulate phosphate levels, and calcium and phosphate metabolism are intimately linked. PTH tells your kidneys to excrete more phosphate in urine. This is important because high phosphate levels can drive calcium out of your blood and cause it to precipitate in tissues. By keeping phosphate levels in check, PTH helps maintain the proper balance between calcium and phosphate. Now let's talk about what happens when kidneys fail. In chronic kidney disease, kidneys lose their ability to activate vitamin D and excrete phosphate. Phosphate starts accumulating in the blood, which drives calcium down. Your parathyroid glands sense the low calcium and start pumping out more PTH. But the PTH can't work properly because there's not enough active vitamin D to help the intestines absorb calcium. So PTH levels keep rising higher and higher, and your parathyroid glands actually enlarge, trying to produce more hormone. Meanwhile, your bones are being destroyed by the chronically elevated PTH levels. This condition is called secondary hyperparathyroidism, and it's a major complication of kidney disease. Your bones aren't passive in this communication network either. Remember osteocalcin from earlier? Bones produce this hormone, and it affects not just muscles and the brain, but also metabolism. Osteocalcin improves insulin sensitivity and helps regulate blood sugar. So the bone-kidney parathyroid crosstalk also indirectly affects your metabolic health. There's also a recently discovered hormone called FGF23 that's produced by bones in response to high phosphate levels. FGF23 travels to the kidneys and tells them to excrete more phosphate and reduce production of active vitamin D. It's the bones talking back to the kidneys, saying, "Hey, phosphate levels are too high. We need you to get rid of some and stop promoting calcium absorption." In kidney disease, FGF23 levels skyrocket because the kidneys can't respond properly, and very high FGF23 is associated with heart disease and mortality. The intestines participate in this crosstalk too, beyond just absorbing calcium in response to vitamin D. Your gut bacteria can affect calcium absorption and bone health. Some bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids that improve calcium absorption. The composition of your gut microbiome might actually affect your bone density through effects on calcium metabolism and inflammation. Age affects this communication network. As we get older, our kidneys become less efficient at activating vitamin D, which means less calcium absorption from food. Older people also tend to have lower vitamin D levels from reduced sun exposure and decreased skin production of vitamin D. The parathyroid glands respond by increasing PTH, which maintains blood calcium but at the expense of bone density. This is one reason why osteoporosis is so common in older adults. Your lungs, heart, and brain form another critical communication triangle. These three organs need to work in perfect coordination to deliver oxygen throughout your body and remove carbon dioxide. The crosstalk between them is constant and sophisticated, adjusting moment by moment to meet your body's changing needs. Let's start with the basics. Your lungs bring oxygen into your body and remove carbon dioxide. Your heart pumps blood through your lungs to pick up that oxygen, then pumps the oxygen-rich blood throughout your body. Your brain monitors the whole process and makes adjustments as needed. But the communication goes far beyond this simple description. Your brain has special chemoreceptors that monitor the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your blood. There are central chemoreceptors in your brainstem that are exquisitely sensitive to carbon dioxide and pH. When carbon dioxide rises even slightly, these receptors send signals to your respiratory control center, which tells your lungs to breathe faster and deeper. This is why holding your breath becomes unbearable. Rising CO2 triggers an overwhelming urge to breathe. There are also peripheral chemoreceptors in your carotid arteries and aorta that sense oxygen levels. When oxygen drops, these receptors signal your brain, which responds by increasing breathing rate and also by telling your heart to beat faster. Your brain is coordinating both organs to improve oxygen delivery. Your heart and lungs are mechanically connected in ways that affect their crosstalk. When you inhale, the pressure in your chest cavity drops, which helps pull blood into your heart. During inhalation, more blood returns to the right side of your heart, which then pumps this blood to your lungs. But at the same time, the expanded lungs compress the heart slightly and reduce how much blood the left side can pump. This creates subtle changes in blood pressure and cardiac output throughout the breathing cycle. It's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Your heart rate naturally speeds up slightly during inhalation and slows during exhalation. Your lungs produce hormones that affect your heart and blood vessels. The endothelial cells lining lung blood vessels produce nitric oxide, which is a powerful vasodilator. It relaxes blood vessels and lowers blood pressure. Lungs also convert angiotensin I to angiotensin II, participating in blood pressure regulation. And lungs filter small blood clots from your circulation, preventing them from reaching your brain or other organs. Your lungs are doing way more than just gas exchange. When lung disease develops, the heart-lung crosstalk gets disrupted. In chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, damaged lungs can't oxygenate blood properly. The heart senses this and tries to compensate by working harder. But chronic low oxygen also causes the blood vessels in the lungs to constrict, which increases resistance against which the right side of the heart must pump. Over time, this leads to right heart failure. The crosstalk between diseased lungs and the heart creates a downward spiral. Sleep apnea is another condition where lung-heart-brain crosstalk goes haywire. During apnea episodes, the airway collapses and breathing stops temporarily. Oxygen drops and carbon dioxide rises. Your brain detects this and sends emergency signals that cause you to wake up slightly and gasp for air. But these repeated episodes of low oxygen also activate your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response. Your heart rate and blood pressure spike dozens or hundreds of times per night. Over time, this leads to sustained high blood pressure, irregular heart rhythms, and increased risk of heart attack and stroke. The disrupted communication between lungs, heart, and brain has systemic consequences. Your brain's oxygen demand is enormous. Despite being only about 2% of your body weight, your brain uses about 20% of your body's oxygen at rest. This is why even brief interruptions in oxygen delivery to the brain are catastrophic. If blood flow to part of your brain stops for just a few minutes, those brain cells die. That's what happens in a stroke. The brain is constantly monitoring its oxygen supply and will sacrifice blood flow to other organs if necessary to preserve brain function. High altitude is an interesting situation that reveals lung-heart-brain crosstalk. At high altitude, there's less oxygen in the air. Your chemoreceptors detect this and tell your lungs to breathe faster. Your brain also tells your kidneys to make more erythropoietin, which stimulates red blood cell production to increase oxygen carrying capacity. Your heart works harder, increasing cardiac output, and blood flow gets redistributed, prioritizing your brain and heart over other organs. All these adjustments happen through coordinated signals between organs. Exercise is another situation that really activates the lung-heart-brain communication network. When you start exercising, your muscles need more oxygen. They send signals to your brain about their increased demands. Your brain responds by increasing breathing rate and depth, and by telling your heart to beat faster and more forcefully. Blood flow gets redistributed away from your gut and kidneys towards your working muscles. Your body is coordinating a system-wide response to the metabolic demands of exercise. The vagus nerve plays a major role in lung-heart-brain communication. This nerve carries signals from your brainstem to your lungs and heart, controlling breathing rhythm and heart rate. It also carries signals from your lungs and heart. Most people think of skin as just a protective wrapper, but your skin is actually a complex organ that's in constant communication with your immune system, nervous system, endocrine system, and pretty much every other part of your body. Your skin is both receiving signals from other organs and sending out its own chemical messages that affect tissues throughout your body. Let's start with the obvious. Your skin is your interface with the outside world. It's covered with sensory receptors that detect touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. These receptors are constantly sending information to your brain through sensory nerves. But the communication isn't just one way. Your brain also sends signals to your skin that affect blood flow, sweating, and even hair follicle activity. When you're too hot, your hypothalamus detects this and sends signals that dilate blood vessels in your skin, bringing more blood to the surface where heat can radiate away. At the same time, your sweat glands receive signals to produce sweat, which cools you down through evaporation. When you're cold, blood vessels in your skin constrict to conserve heat for your core organs. Your brain is constantly adjusting skin blood flow to regulate body temperature. But your skin is also an endocrine organ. It produces hormones that affect other organs. The most important example is vitamin D. When UVB radiation from sunlight hits your skin, it converts a cholesterol-derived molecule in your skin cells into pre-vitamin D. Recent research has shown that sunlight exposure affects your skin's production of nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator that can lower blood pressure. Some scientists think this might be one reason why sun exposure is associated with better cardiovascular health, independent of vitamin D. Your skin is sensing environmental signals and translating them into systemic effects on your circulatory system. Your skin is also a major immune organ. The skin contains specialized immune cells called Langerhans cells that act as sentinels, sampling antigens from the environment and presenting them to other immune cells. When your skin encounters a pathogen or allergen, These immune cells can trigger local inflammatory responses and also send signals to lymph nodes and your systemic immune system. Many autoimmune diseases and allergic conditions involve miscommunication between skin immune cells and the rest of the immune system. Wound healing is an incredible example of organ crosstalk involving the skin. When you cut yourself, damaged cells release signals that attract platelets and immune cells. Platelets form a clot while also releasing growth factors. Immune cells clean up debris and release cytokines that recruit more cells. Fibroblasts in the skin receive signals to migrate into the wound and produce collagen to rebuild the tissue. Blood vessels receive signals to grow into the healing wound, and nerve cells eventually regenerate to restore sensation. This coordinated response involves dozens of different cell types, all receiving and sending chemical signals. Your skin also produces antimicrobial peptides that help fight infections. But these peptides don't just kill bacteria locally. Some of them can enter your circulation and affect immune responses throughout your body. Your skin is contributing to your systemic immune defense, not just local protection. The connection between skin and stress is well documented, but still being actively researched. When you're stressed, your brain activates your sympathetic nervous system and releases cortisol. These stress signals affect your skin in multiple ways. They can trigger acne breakouts by increasing oil production, worsen inflammatory skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis, delay wound healing, and even accelerate skin aging. The communication between your brain and skin is so strong that some dermatologists now ask about stress and mental health when treating chronic skin conditions. There's also fascinating crosstalk between your skin and your circadian rhythms. Your skin has its own circadian clock, genes that cycle on and off over a 24-hour period. These clocks affect when your skin is most vulnerable to UV damage, when it repairs DNA damage most efficiently, and when various skin cells divide. Your central circadian clock in your brain communicates with your skin's clock through hormones like cortisol and melatonin, helping to synchronize skin function with the day-night cycle. Your gut and skin also talk to each other, which might seem surprising since they're not physically connected. But your gut microbiome can affect your skin health through several mechanisms. Gut bacteria influence systemic inflammation, which affects inflammatory skin conditions. They produce metabolites that enter your bloodstream and can affect skin cell function. And alterations in gut bacteria have been linked to acne, rosacea, eczema, and psoriasis. Some dermatologists are now using probiotics to treat skin conditions by modifying gut-skin crosstalk. Your skin even communicates with your fat tissue. Adipocytes, fat cells, exist in the deepest layer of your skin, and these cells produce hormones like leptin and adiponectin, just like the fat tissue elsewhere in your body. Skin fat cells might play a role in wound healing, hair growth, and even skin immunity. Your adrenal glands are two walnut-sized organs sitting on top of your kidneys, and they're the command center for your body's stress response. When we talk about organ crosstalk, the adrenal glands are involved in some of the most dramatic and far-reaching communication cascades in your body. When these glands get activated, they send signals that affect every organ system within seconds. Each adrenal gland has two distinct parts, the outer cortex and the inner medulla. They're like two different organs squished together, producing completely different hormones. The adrenal medulla produces adrenaline and noradrenaline. These are the hormones responsible for the immediate fight or flight response. The adrenal cortex produces cortisol, aldosterone, and some sex hormones. These have longer-lasting effects on metabolism, immune function, and fluid balance. Let's start with adrenaline, also called epinephrine. When your brain perceives a threat, it sends a signal through your sympathetic nervous system directly to your adrenal medulla, which dumps adrenaline into your bloodstream within seconds. Adrenaline then travels throughout your body, binding to receptors on multiple organs and triggering coordinated changes. Your heart responds to adrenaline by beating faster and more forcefully. Your lungs' airways dilate to let in more air. Blood vessels in your muscles dilate to deliver more oxygen and fuel, while vessels in your gut and skin constrict because digestion and temperature regulation aren't priorities during an emergency. Your liver responds by breaking down glycogen and releasing glucose into your blood to fuel the emergency response. Your pupils dilate to improve vision, Even your immune system responds, with certain immune cells becoming more active while others are suppressed. This is elegant coordination. Your brain detected a threat and pulled one lever, activation of the adrenal medulla, and that single action triggered appropriate responses in your cardiovascular system, respiratory system, muscular system, metabolic system, and sensory systems. This is organ crosstalk at its most dramatic. But the stress response doesn't end with adrenaline. Your brain also activates what's called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Your hypothalamus releases CRH, which tells your pituitary gland to release ACTH, which then tells your adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. This cascade takes several minutes rather than seconds, but cortisol's effects last much longer. Cortisol affects almost every organ in your body. It raises blood sugar by stimulating gluconeogenesis in your liver and breaking down muscle protein to provide amino acids for glucose production. It suppresses your immune system to prevent inflammatory responses from getting out of hand. It affects your mood and cognition through effects on your brain. It changes how your fat tissue stores and releases fatty acids. It affects your gut, your skin, your reproductive system, and your bones. In the short term, cortisol helps you survive stress. But chronic elevation of cortisol, which happens with chronic stress, creates problems throughout your body. Your immune system becomes chronically suppressed, making you more susceptible to infections. Your brain's hippocampus can actually shrink with prolonged cortisol exposure, affecting memory and learning. Your bones lose density because cortisol interferes with bone formation. Your muscles break down. Your gut function gets disrupted. Chronic stress literally damages multiple organ systems through persistently elevated cortisol. The adrenal glands also produce aldosterone, which talks primarily to your kidneys, but affects your heart and blood vessels too. Aldosterone tells your kidneys to retain sodium and water, which increases blood volume and raises blood pressure. This makes sense during stress or blood loss. You want to maintain blood pressure to keep perfusing your vital organs. But excessive aldosterone, which can happen in certain adrenal tumors or in heart failure, leads to high blood pressure, fluid retention, and strain on your heart. There's interesting crosstalk between your adrenal glands and your immune system. Acute stress and adrenaline release actually boost certain immune functions. This is your body preparing for potential injury during the fight or flight situation. But cortisol has anti-inflammatory effects. This dual action makes sense. You want immediate immune activation in case you get wounded, but you don't want inflammation to get out of control. The timing and balance between these two signals, pro-inflammatory adrenaline and anti-inflammatory cortisol, is crucial. Your adrenal glands also respond to metabolic signals. When your blood sugar drops too low, your adrenal medulla releases adrenaline to stimulate glucose release from your liver. This is one reason why people who skip meals might feel shaky and anxious. Their adrenal glands are responding to hypoglycemia with adrenaline release. There's also crosstalk between your adrenal glands and your thyroid. Cortisol can interfere with thyroid hormone production and with the conversion of T4 to active T3 in tissues. This is one reason why chronic stress can cause symptoms of low thyroid function even when the thyroid itself is healthy. The adrenal-thyroid interaction affects your overall metabolic rate and energy levels. Adrenal fatigue is a controversial concept. Some practitioners claim that chronic stress can exhaust your adrenal glands, causing them to produce insufficient cortisol. However, true adrenal insufficiency, Addison's disease, is rare and serious. What's probably happening in people who feel exhausted and stressed is dysregulation of the HPA axis and altered circadian cortisol rhythms rather than actual adrenal failure. If we're talking about organ crosstalk, we have to discuss the placenta. This is a temporary organ that exists only during pregnancy, and it might be the most sophisticated example of interorganism communication that exists in nature. The placenta is literally mediating crosstalk between two different individuals, the mother and the developing fetus, with completely different genetic makeups and potentially conflicting needs. The placenta forms from both fetal and maternal tissues, creating an interface where these two organisms can communicate and exchange resources without their blood supplies actually mixing. It's like a trading post on the border between two countries. And the communication that happens through the placenta is extraordinarily complex, involving hormones, nutrients, gases, waste products, immune signals, and even cells. Let's start with the basic functions. The placenta transfers oxygen from the mother as blood to the fetus's blood while removing carbon dioxide in the opposite direction. It transfers nutrients, glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, from mother to fetus. It removes waste products from the fetus for the mother's body to eliminate. And it acts as an endocrine organ, producing hormones that affect both mother and fetus. The hormone production by the placenta is mind-blowing. It produces human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, which is the hormone detected by pregnancy tests. HCG maintains the corpus luteum in the ovary during early pregnancy, ensuring continued production of progesterone. The placenta also produces progesterone and estrogen themselves, taking over from the ovaries as pregnancy progresses. These hormones signal to the mother's body to maintain the pregnancy and prepare for lactation. But the placenta produces many other hormones too. It makes placental lactogen, which affects the mother's metabolism to ensure glucose is available for the fetus. It produces corticotropin-releasing hormone, the same hormone your hypothalamus produces, which may help time the onset of labor. It secretes leptin, affecting maternal appetite and metabolism. The placenta is basically a hormone factory that's reprogramming the mother's physiology to support the pregnancy. The immunological crosstalk through the placenta is particularly fascinating. The fetus is genetically half from the father, which means it expresses proteins that are foreign to the mother's immune system. Under normal circumstances, the mother's immune system should attack and reject the fetus as foreign tissue. So why doesn't this happen? The placenta creates a unique immunological environment. It produces molecules that suppress local immune responses and prevent maternal immune cells from attacking fetal tissues. But it's a careful balance. The placenta can completely suppress maternal immunity because the mother needs to be able to fight infections. The placenta must calibrate immune responses to tolerate the fetus while still protecting both mother and baby from pathogens. Maternal immune cells do cross into the placenta, and there's evidence they play important roles in placental development and function. Certain types of immune cells help remodel maternal blood vessels to increase blood flow to the placenta. Others help defend against infections. The placenta is coordinating a complex immune dialogue between mother and fetus. Recent research has shown that the placenta also produces exosomes, those little vesicle messages we talked about earlier. Placental exosomes can enter maternal circulation and potentially reprogram maternal cells. They might carry microRNAs that change how maternal tissues express genes. Scientists are still figuring out what all these messages mean, but it's clear the placenta is sending sophisticated signals to the mother's body. The placenta is also selective about what crosses from mother to fetus. Some molecules pass freely, others are actively transported, and still others are blocked. The placenta protects the fetus from many maternal drugs and toxins while allowing passage of essential nutrients and antibodies. This selectivity requires communication. The placenta is constantly sensing what's in maternal blood and making decisions about what to allow through. Maternal antibodies, particularly IgG, can cross the placenta to the fetus. This is crucial for fetal immunity. The fetus's immune system isn't mature enough to produce its own antibodies, so it borrows immunity from the mother. If the mother has antibodies against measles, or chickenpox or other infections, those antibodies cross the placenta and protect the newborn for the first several months of life. This is passive immunity, and it's an elegant example of mother-fetus crosstalk. When placental function is compromised, the effects ripple through both mother and fetus. In preeclampsia, abnormal placental development leads to high blood pressure and organ damage in the mother. The placenta is sending inflammatory signals that activate maternal blood vessels and kidneys inappropriately. In intrauterine growth restriction, the placenta fails to provide adequate nutrients, and fetal growth slows. The placental crosstalk has broken down. The placenta even affects maternal brain function. Pregnancy changes brain structure and function, probably through placental hormones. These changes affect maternal behavior, promoting attachment and caregiving. The placenta is literally programming the mother's brain to care for the offspring. At the end of pregnancy, the placenta plays a role in timing labor. Rising levels of placental CRH, changes in placental progesterone metabolism, and other placental signals contribute to the cascade of events that initiate labor. The placenta is communicating that it's time for the pregnancy to end. After birth, the placenta must be expelled, and maternal physiology must shift again. The sudden loss of placental hormones triggers physiological changes that initiate lactation and begin returning maternal metabolism to the pre-pregnant state. We've already touched on how white fat tissue communicates with other organs, but there's another type of fat in your body that deserves its own discussion: brown adipose tissue, or brown fat. The crosstalk between brown fat, white fat, your muscles, and your metabolism reveals fascinating aspects of how your body regulates energy balance and temperature. Brown fat gets its color from being packed with mitochondria, the energy-producing structures in cells. But unlike the mitochondria in most cells, which couple energy production to ATP synthesis, brown fat mitochondria have a special protein called UCP1 that uncouples this process. The result is that brown fat burns calories to produce heat rather than storing energy. It's like having a furnace in your body that burns fat for warmth. Babies have a lot of brown fat because they can't shiver effectively and need another way to stay warm. Scientists used to think brown fat disappeared in adults, but PET scans revealed that adults do have active brown fat depots, mainly around the neck, shoulders, and spine. The amount varies between people, and it can be activated by cold exposure. When you're exposed to cold, your sympathetic nervous system sends signals to your brown fat through nerves and through the release of noradrenaline. These signals activate UCP1, causing your brown fat to burn fatty acids and glucose to produce heat. At the same time, white fat throughout your body gets signals to break down stored fat and release fatty acids into your bloodstream, providing fuel for the brown fat to burn. But brown fat doesn't just respond to signals, it sends them too. Activated brown fat produces hormones and signaling molecules collectively called beta-kines. These beta-kines travel through your bloodstream and affect other organs. One important beta-kine is FGF21, which improves insulin sensitivity in your liver and fat tissue. Another is IL-6, which in this context helps mobilize fatty acids from white fat. Brown fat is communicating with your white fat and liver to coordinate metabolic responses. There's also crosstalk between brown fat and your muscles during exercise. When you exercise in the cold, both your muscles and brown fat are burning fuel for energy and heat production. They're competing for the same fuel sources, glucose and fatty acids from your bloodstream, and there's evidence they send signals to coordinate their activity. Your muscles produce irisin during exercise, and irisin can actually convert white fat cells into beige fat cells that have some brown fat characteristics. Your muscles are telling your fat tissue to become more metabolically active. This process of white fat browning is fascinating. Under certain conditions, white fat cells can start expressing UCP1 and take on brown fat characteristics. These are called beige or bright fat cells. They're sort of intermediate between white and brown fat. Cold exposure, exercise, and certain dietary factors can all promote browning of white fat. Scientists are interested in this because increasing the amount of metabolically active fat might help treat obesity and diabetes. The location of white fat in your body affects its communication patterns. Subcutaneous white fat, under your skin, and visceral white fat, around your organs, send different signals. Subcutaneous fat is generally healthier. It stores excess energy relatively safely and produces moderate levels of beneficial hormones like adiponectin. Visceral fat, especially in obesity, produces high levels of inflammatory cytokines and contributes to insulin resistance. The ratio of subcutaneous to visceral fat is more important for health than total body fat. There's also interesting crosstalk between your fat tissue and your microbiome. Gut bacteria produce metabolites that can affect fat storage and metabolism. Short-chain fatty acids from bacterial fermentation of fiber can signal to fat cells and affect their insulin sensitivity and fat storage. Some bacterial metabolites can even affect white fat browning. The gut-fat crosstalk is bidirectional too. Hormones from fat tissue can affect gut bacteria composition. Your fat tissue also communicates with your reproductive system through leptin. Leptin levels signal your brain about energy availability, and reproductive function depends on adequate leptin. This is why women with very low body fat, athletes, people with eating disorders, often stop menstruating. Their fat tissue isn't producing enough leptin to support the energy demands of reproduction. When leptin levels rise to a sufficient level, reproductive function returns. There's even crosstalk between fat tissue and cancer cells. Cancer cells can manipulate nearby fat cells, causing them to break down and release fatty acids that fuel cancer growth. And obesity-related inflammation from fat tissue creates an environment that promotes cancer development and progression. The communication between fat and cancer is an area of intense research. Aging affects fat tissue communication. As we age, white fat tends to redistribute from subcutaneous depots to visceral depots, even without overall weight gain. This shift toward more inflammatory visceral fat contributes to age-related metabolic problems. Brown fat activity also tends to decline with age, reducing our metabolic flexibility and ability to handle cold stress. Recent research has discovered that fat tissue has its own circadian rhythm. Fat cells have molecular clocks that cycle gene expression over 24 hours. This means your fat tissue is more or less sensitive to insulin, more or less active in storing or releasing fat, depending on time of day. Disrupted circadian rhythms, like from shift work or jet lag, can mess up fat tissue function and contribute to metabolic disease. Your spleen doesn't get much attention compared to organs like your heart or brain, but it's a crucial player in several important crosstalk networks. Located in your upper left abdomen, your spleen acts as a filter for blood, a reservoir for blood cells, and an important component of your immune system. And it's in constant communication with your bone marrow, liver, immune system, and cardiovascular system. Let's start with the spleen's role in blood filtering. Your entire blood volume passes through your spleen regularly, and as blood flows through, the spleen's specialized tissue screens for old or damaged red blood cells. Red blood cells normally live about 120 days before they wear out. Your spleen recognizes when red blood cells are past their prime. Maybe they're less flexible or their membrane is damaged, and removes them from circulation. Special immune cells called macrophages in your spleen literally eat these old red blood cells. But here's where the communication comes in. When your spleen breaks down red blood cells, it salvages the iron from their hemoglobin. This iron gets packaged up and sent to your bone marrow to be recycled into new red blood cells. Your spleen is communicating with your bone marrow about iron availability. If you lose a lot of blood, your bone marrow needs to ramp up red blood cell production, and the iron recycled by your spleen is a crucial resource for this process. Your spleen also acts as a blood reservoir. In humans, this function isn't as dramatic as in some animals, but your spleen does hold about a cup of blood that can be squeezed out into circulation if needed. When you exercise intensely or experience blood loss, your sympathetic nervous system signals your spleen to contract and release its stored blood cells. This is your spleen, responding to signals from your autonomic nervous system and contributing to the cardiovascular response to stress. The immunological functions of your spleen are extensive. Your spleen contains white pulp that's packed with lymphocytes, T cells and B cells that are crucial for adaptive immunity. As blood flows through your spleen, these immune cells survey the blood for pathogens and abnormal cells. If they detect something concerning, they activate and coordinate an immune response. Your spleen is particularly important for fighting encapsulated bacteria. Bacteria with thick polysaccharide coats that make them harder for immune cells to recognize and destroy. The unique environment in your spleen allows B cells to produce antibodies specifically against these bacterial capsules. This is why people who have their spleen removed are at increased risk for severe infections from bacteria like pneumococcus and meningococcus. The crosstalk between your spleen and liver is fascinating. When your spleen breaks down red blood cells, one of the byproducts is bilirubin, which is yellow-brown in color. This bilirubin travels through your bloodstream to your liver, which processes it and excretes it in bile. If your spleen is breaking down red blood cells too quickly, like in certain types of anemia, bilirubin levels rise and you can develop jaundice, the yellow discoloration of skin and eyes. The communication between spleen and liver maintains the balance of red blood cell turnover and bilirubin disposal. Your spleen also communicates with your bone marrow about platelet needs. Platelets are cell fragments crucial for blood clotting. Your spleen normally stores about a third of your body's platelets, releasing them into circulation when needed for clotting. But the spleen also monitors platelet quality and removes old or damaged platelets, signaling your bone marrow when more need to be produced. There's interesting evidence that your spleen responds to psychological stress. Studies have shown that acute stress can cause your spleen to contract and release immune cells into circulation. This might be an evolutionary adaptation. If you're stressed because you're in danger, you might get injured, so having more immune cells available makes sense. But chronic stress might lead to chronic immune activation through this spleen-stress connection. Your spleen also plays a role in blood pressure regulation through several mechanisms. The spleen can release angiotensin-converting enzyme, which is involved in the renin-angiotensin system that controls blood pressure. And the spleen's effect on blood volume, through holding or releasing stored blood, indirectly affects blood pressure. Recent research has uncovered that your spleen might store stem cells that can be mobilized after injury. These stem cells can travel to sites of tissue damage and potentially contribute to healing. This is a relatively new discovery, and researchers are still figuring out how the spleen knows when to release these stem cells and what signals coordinate this process. In certain diseases, spleen organ crosstalk gets disrupted. In portal hypertension, where pressure backs up in the liver's blood vessels, the spleen becomes engorged with blood and enlarged. This enlarged spleen then traps more blood cells than normal, removing them from circulation. The result is low blood counts despite normal bone marrow production. The pathological communication between the diseased liver and spleen creates problems throughout the blood and immune systems. Your spleen also responds to inflammation elsewhere in your body. Chronic inflammatory conditions often cause spleen enlargement because the spleen is reacting to inflammatory signals circulating through your blood. The spleen is like an immune surveillance station that's constantly monitoring what's in your bloodstream and responding to systemic inflammatory signals. The pineal gland is a tiny organ in your brain, about the size of a grain of rice, but it plays an outsized role in coordinating circadian rhythms throughout your body. By producing the hormone melatonin, your pineal gland essentially broadcasts a time signal to every organ system, coordinating sleep-wake cycles, metabolism, immune function, and hormone production across your entire body. This is organ crosstalk on a temporal dimension. Your pineal gland sits deep in your brain, between the two hemispheres. Despite being buried in the center of your head, it receives information about light exposure through an indirect pathway from your eyes. When light hits your retinas, signals travel through a specific pathway to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, which is your brain's master circadian clock. The SCN then sends signals to your pineal gland, telling it whether it's day or night. During darkness, your pineal gland produces and releases melatonin into your bloodstream. Melatonin levels rise in the evening, peak in the middle of the night, and fall before dawn. This daily rhythm of melatonin acts like a circadian time cue that synchronizes clocks throughout your body. Almost every organ has its own molecular clock, genes that cycle on and off over roughly 24 hours, and melatonin helps coordinate these peripheral clocks with the central clock in your brain. Let's trace how this pineal-mediated crosstalk affects different organs. In your digestive system, melatonin signals that it's nighttime and energy expenditure should be reduced. Your gut motility slows down. Your metabolic rate decreases. Your pancreas becomes less responsive to glucose, which is one reason why eating large meals late at night can lead to higher blood sugar spikes. Your body ain't expecting to process food when melatonin levels are high. Your liver receives melatonin signals and adjusts its metabolic programs accordingly. At night, your liver shifts toward gluconeogenesis, making new glucose from stored glycogen, to maintain blood sugar while you're fasting during sleep. Genes involved in fatty acid metabolism cycle on and off. Your liver is literally doing different biochemical tasks at different times of day, coordinated partly by melatonin signals from your pineal gland. Your immune system also responds to circadian melatonin rhythms. Certain immune cells become more active at night. This might seem counterintuitive, but it makes sense. At night, when you're not exposed to new pathogens from the environment and you're resting, your immune system can focus on surveillance and maintenance. Melatonin affects the production and activity of various immune cells, influencing inflammatory responses. Your cardiovascular system follows circadian patterns influenced by melatonin. Blood pressure normally drops at night. This is called nocturnal dipping, and this is partly mediated by melatonin's effects on blood vessels and the autonomic nervous system. Heart rate variability changes throughout the day and night. People whose blood pressure doesn't dip at night have increased cardiovascular risk, suggesting that disrupted circadian crosstalk between the pineal gland and cardiovascular system is harmful. Melatonin also affects your reproductive system. In many animals, melatonin signals seasonal changes in day length and triggers breeding seasons. In humans, the effects are more subtle, but melatonin still influences reproductive hormone production. The pineal gland is communicating photoperiod information that can affect fertility. Your bones even respond to circadian melatonin signals. Bone formation and bone breakdown follow daily rhythms, with bone breakdown more active at night. This means your skeleton is literally remodeling on a circadian schedule, influenced by signals from your pineal gland. The crosstalk between light exposure, the SCN, and the pineal gland can be disrupted by modern lifestyles. Artificial light exposure at night suppresses melatonin production. When you look at screens late at night, the blue light reaches your retinas and signals your pineal gland that it's daytime, suppressing melatonin release even though it's actually nighttime. This disrupts the circadian coordination across your body. Shift work is particularly harmful because it repeatedly forces misalignment between external time cues and internal circadian rhythms. Shift workers have increased risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and immune problems. The pineal gland is trying to coordinate circadian function based on light exposure, but that light exposure no longer matches when the person is sleeping and eating. The crosstalk gets scrambled. Jet lag is a temporary form of circadian misalignment. Your pineal gland's melatonin rhythm is still synchronized to your departure time zone, but your environment and behavior are in a different time zone. It takes several days for the pineal-mediated circadian signals to shift and resynchronize peripheral clocks throughout your body. Melatonin supplements are commonly used for sleep, but their effects on circadian crosstalk are complex. Taking melatonin at the right time can help shift circadian rhythms, useful for jet lag or adjusting to shift work. But taking melatonin at the wrong time might confuse the circadian system, sending conflicting time signals to different organs. Age affects pineal gland function. Melatonin production tends to decline with aging, and the rhythm becomes less pronounced. This might contribute to the sleep problems and circadian disruption common in older adults. The weakened signal from the pineal gland means less clear coordination of circadian rhythms across different organs. Seasonal affective disorder might involve pineal-mediated crosstalk. In winter, with shorter days and longer nights, melatonin duration is extended. This extended melatonin signal might affect mood circuits in the brain. We need to talk about the trillions of microorganisms living in and on your body, particularly in your gut. Your microbiome is sometimes called a virtual organ because these bacteria, fungi, and viruses are so integrated with your body's functions that they act like an additional organ. The crosstalk between your microbiome and your human organs is bidirectional, constant, and crucial for health. Your gut contains roughly 100 trillion bacterial cells. That's actually more bacterial cells than human cells in your body, though bacterial cells are much smaller. These bacteria aren't just passive residents. They're active participants in digestion, immune function, metabolism, and even brain function. They produce vitamins, break down dietary fiber into usable nutrients, train your immune system, and synthesize neurotransmitters. Let's start with microbiome gut crosstalk. Your gut bacteria live in the mucus layer covering your intestinal lining, and there's constant communication between these bacteria and the epithelial cells of your gut. The bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate, and acetate when they ferment dietary fiber. These short-chain fatty acids are energy sources for your gut cells, but they also act as signaling molecules. Butyrate in particular is fascinating. It's the preferred fuel for the cells lining your colon, and it also has anti-inflammatory effects. Butyrate can affect gene expression in gut cells, strengthening the intestinal barrier and regulating immune responses. When your diet lacks fiber and your bacteria can't produce enough butyrate, your gut barrier can become leaky, allowing bacterial products to enter your bloodstream and trigger inflammation. The crosstalk between your bacteria and gut lining is crucial for maintaining intestinal health. Your gut bacteria also communicate with your immune system. The majority of your immune cells reside in and around your intestines, because that's where your body has the most contact with foreign organisms. Your immune system must learn to distinguish between beneficial bacteria that should be tolerated and harmful pathogens that should be attacked. This education happens through constant crosstalk between bacteria and immune cells in your gut. Specific bacterial species have different effects on immune function. Some bacteria promote regulatory T cells that dampen inflammation. Others stimulate inflammatory responses. The balance of bacterial species in your gut affects your overall immune tone, whether you lean toward inflammatory or anti-inflammatory states. This gut bacterial composition can affect autoimmune diseases, allergies, and susceptibility to infections. The gut microbiome brain axis is one of the most exciting areas of research right now. Your gut bacteria produce neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine, and these can signal to nerve endings in your gut. While these bacterial neurotransmitters probably don't cross into your bloodstream in large amounts, they can affect the vagus nerve that connects your gut to your brain. Changes in gut bacteria have been linked to depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases. Your microbiome also affects your metabolism through multiple mechanisms. Gut bacteria can influence how many calories you extract from food. Certain bacterial species are more efficient at breaking down complex carbohydrates and fiber, harvesting more energy from your diet. Studies have shown that the microbiome composition differs between lean and obese individuals, and transplanting gut bacteria from obese mice into lean mice can cause weight gain. Bacteria also produce metabolites that affect your liver's metabolism. Some bacterial products are sensed by your liver and affect fat metabolism, glucose homeostasis, and cholesterol synthesis. The gut microbiome liver axis is increasingly recognized as important in fatty liver disease, metabolic syndrome, and diabetes. Your microbiome even affects your cardiovascular health. Some gut bacteria can convert dietary choline and carnitine, found in red meat and eggs, into trimethylamine, which your liver then converts to TMAO. High levels of TMAO have been associated with increased cardiovascular disease risk. The crosstalk between gut bacteria, diet, and cardiovascular health is complex and still being unraveled. Antibiotics dramatically disrupt microbiome crosstalk. Antibiotics don't just kill pathogenic bacteria, they also kill beneficial bacteria, sometimes wiping out entire bacterial species from your gut. After antibiotic treatment, the microbiome may not fully recover its original composition. This can have lasting effects on immune function, metabolism, and susceptibility to diseases. Every time you take antibiotics, you're disrupting years of established crosstalk between your microbiome and your organs. Diet profoundly affects microbiome composition, and thus the signals your organs receive from gut bacteria. Diets high in fiber promote bacteria that produce beneficial short-chain fatty acids. Diets high in processed foods and low in fiber promote different bacterial species that may contribute to inflammation and metabolic dysfunction. When you change your diet, you're changing the conversation between your microbiome and your organs. Probiotics and prebiotics are attempts to modify microbiome crosstalk therapeutically. Probiotics introduce beneficial bacterial species, while prebiotics provide food for beneficial bacteria already in your gut. But the effectiveness varies tremendously depending on which bacteria you're introducing, what your existing microbiome looks like, and what you're trying to treat. We're still learning how to therapeutically manipulate microbiome crosstalk. The oral microbiome, bacteria in your mouth, also communicates with your body. Periodontal disease and poor oral health are associated with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and adverse pregnancy outcomes. Oral bacteria can enter your bloodstream and potentially affect distant organs. The crosstalk between your oral microbiome and systemic health is another emerging area. Here's something wild. The mitochondria in your cells, the powerhouses that produce energy, were once free living bacteria that got incorporated into early cells billions of years ago. They still have their own DNA, separate from your nuclear DNA, and they're still communicating with the rest of your cells in ways that affect every organ in your body. Mitochondrial communication is one of the most fundamental forms of crosstalk in biology. Every cell in your body except red blood cells, contains mitochondria, usually hundreds or thousands per cell. High-energy organs like your heart, brain, and muscles are packed with mitochondria because they need constant ATP production to function. But mitochondria do way more than just make ATP. They're sensing energy status, regulating metabolism, controlling cell death, and producing signaling molecules that affect cellular function. Mitochondria communicate with the cell nucleus constantly. This crosstalk works both ways. The nucleus sends signals that affect mitochondrial function, and mitochondria send signals back that change nuclear gene expression. Most mitochondrial proteins are actually encoded in your nuclear DNA, so the nucleus must coordinate with mitochondria to ensure the right proteins are made in the right amounts at the right time. When mitochondria are stressed, maybe from lack of nutrients, excess oxidative stress, or accumulated damage, they send retrograde signals to the nucleus. These signals can trigger protective responses, ramping up production of antioxidant enzymes or proteins that help repair damaged mitochondria. If the stress is too severe, mitochondria can trigger apoptosis, programmed cell death, essentially telling the nucleus, this cell is too damaged. It needs to self-destruct for the good of the organism. Mitochondria also produce reactive oxygen species, or ROS, as byproducts of energy production. At high levels, ROS cause oxidative damage. But at low levels, ROS act as signaling molecules. Mitochondrial ROS can affect multiple signaling pathways in the cell, influencing everything from metabolism to immune responses to aging. Mitochondria are using ROS as a language to communicate the cell's metabolic state. Here's where mitochondrial communication becomes relevant to organ crosstalk. Different organs have different mitochondrial characteristics and different sensitivities to mitochondrial dysfunction. Your heart is incredibly dependent on mitochondrial function. Heart cells are packed with mitochondria that must constantly produce ATP to power the heart's non-stop beating. When heart mitochondria become dysfunctional, from aging, toxins, or genetic mutations, heart failure can result. Your brain is also hugely dependent on mitochondria. Neurons have enormous energy demands, especially at synapses where neurotransmitters are being constantly released and reabsorbed. Mitochondrial dysfunction is implicated in neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease, where dying neurons show damaged mitochondria. The loss of communication between mitochondria and the rest of the cell contributes to neurodegeneration. Mitochondria in different organs respond to systemic signals differently. Insulin affects mitochondrial function in fat cells, muscle cells, and liver cells, but the responses differ by tissue. Exercise signals affect muscle mitochondria, causing them to multiply and become more efficient. Thyroid hormones affect mitochondria throughout the body, increasing their activity and oxygen consumption. So organ-level crosstalk often works by affecting mitochondrial function in target organs. Mitochondrial DNA mutations create interesting communication problems. Because mitochondria have their own DNA and divide independently of cells, mutations in mitochondrial DNA can accumulate differently in different tissues. You can end up with a mosaic pattern where some cells have mostly normal mitochondria and others have mostly mutant mitochondria. The organs with the highest proportion of dysfunctional mitochondria show symptoms first, usually high-energy organs like brain, heart, and muscle. Mitochondrial dysfunction is now recognized as a contributor to many chronic diseases. Diabetes involves mitochondrial dysfunction in pancreatic beta cells, muscle cells, and liver cells. Cardiovascular disease involves mitochondrial problems in heart muscle and blood vessel walls. Even cancer cells often have altered mitochondrial metabolism. When mitochondria aren't communicating properly with the rest of the cell, normal cellular function breaks down. Recent research has discovered that mitochondria can actually move between cells in certain circumstances. During tissue damage or stress, cells can release mitochondria in extracellular vesicles that other cells can absorb. Stem cells can transfer mitochondria to damaged cells, potentially helping them recover. This is mitochondrial communication at an intercellular level. Mitochondria from one cell affecting the energy status and function of other cells. Mitochondria also communicate with the immune system in interesting ways. When cells are infected with viruses, damaged mitochondria can release their DNA into the cell's cytoplasm. The cell's immune sensors recognize this mitochondrial DNA as a danger signal and trigger antiviral responses. Mitochondria are essentially acting as sentinel that alerts the immune system when something is wrong. The communication between mitochondria and aging is particularly fascinating. As we age, mitochondria accumulate damage to their DNA and proteins. Dysfunctional mitochondria produce more ROS and less ATP. They may fail to trigger apoptosis when they should, allowing damaged cells to persist. The breakdown in mitochondrial communication is thought to be a fundamental driver of aging and age-related diseases. Exercise improves mitochondrial communication. Physical activity triggers signals that cause mitochondria to multiply in muscle cells and become more efficient. This mitochondrial biogenesis is one way exercise improves metabolic health. When your muscles have more functional mitochondria, they're better at burning fuel and generating energy. The communication between exercise signals, muscle cells, and mitochondria creates beneficial adaptations. Is one of the most sophisticated communication interfaces in your body. It's not really a single organ, but rather a specialized feature of blood vessels in your brain that controls what can pass from your bloodstream into your brain tissue. Understanding the blood-brain barrier reveals a lot about how your brain communicates with the rest of your body while maintaining its own protected environment. Your brain is an incredibly delicate organ. Unlike other tissues that can tolerate some inflammation or chemical fluctuations, your brain requires extremely stable conditions. The blood-brain barrier creates this stability by being highly selective about what crosses from blood into brain tissue. But this barrier isn't a static wall. It's a dynamic interface that actively regulates communication between your brain and body. The blood-brain barrier consists of specialized endothelial cells that line brain blood vessels. Unlike endothelial cells elsewhere in your body, these cells are connected by extremely tight junctions that don't allow molecules to slip between cells. Additionally, these endothelial cells have very few transport vesicles, and they're covered on the brain side by astrocyte end feet, processes from star-shaped brain cells called astrocytes. It's a multi-layered system designed for selectivity. Small, lipid-soluble molecules can cross the blood-brain barrier relatively easily by dissolving through cell membranes. This is how oxygen, carbon dioxide, and hormones like cortisol and thyroid hormone enter brain tissue. But larger molecules, water-soluble molecules, and charged molecules generally can't cross unless there's a specific transport mechanism. Your brain has evolved specific transporters for glucose, amino acids, and other nutrients it needs. This selective permeability means your brain must actively communicate about what it needs. When blood glucose drops, your brain can't just passively absorb glucose. It must maintain glucose transport across the barrier. The blood-brain barrier responds to signals about energy status, increasing glucose transport when needed. This is crosstalk between your brain's energy demands and the blood-brain barrier's transport function. The blood-brain barrier also protects your brain from your own immune system. Most immune cells and antibodies can't cross the blood-brain barrier under normal circumstances. Your brain has its own resident immune cells called microglia, rather than relying on circulating immune cells. This creates immune privilege. Your brain is somewhat isolated from systemic immune responses. But this immune isolation isn't absolute. The blood-brain barrier can communicate with the systemic immune system through several mechanisms. During infections, inflammatory cytokines in your blood can signal to blood-brain barrier cells, which then produce molecules that affect brain function. This is how systemic infections cause brain-related symptoms like fatigue, altered mental status, and fever. The blood-brain barrier is translating peripheral immune signals into central nervous system effects. There are also specific regions of your brain where the blood-brain barrier is purposefully leaky. These circumventricular organs include areas like the area post-rema, which is your brain's vomiting center. This region needs to sense toxins in your blood so it can trigger vomiting to expel them. The hypothalamus also has regions with a leaky blood-brain barrier, so it can sense hormone levels and nutrients in your blood. Your brain is strategically allowing communication in specific locations while maintaining protection elsewhere. The blood-brain barrier changes in disease states. In stroke, lack of oxygen causes blood-brain barrier breakdown, allowing fluid and immune cells to enter brain tissue. This contributes to brain swelling and secondary injury after stroke. In multiple sclerosis, immune cells inappropriately cross the blood-brain barrier and attack the insulation around nerve fibers. In Alzheimer's disease, blood-brain barrier dysfunction may contribute to disease progression by failing to clear toxic proteins from brain tissue. Aging affects blood-brain barrier function. As we get older, tight junctions between endothelial cells become less tight, transport systems become less efficient, and the barrier becomes more permeable to molecules that should be excluded. This blood-brain barrier aging might contribute to cognitive decline and increased risk of neurodegenerative diseases. The communication interface between body and brain is deteriorating. Certain substances can temporarily open the blood-brain barrier. Alcohol, for instance, can transiently increase blood-brain barrier permeability. Some chemotherapy drugs are designed to temporarily disrupt the barrier, so other drugs can enter brain tissue to treat brain tumors. Understanding and manipulating blood-brain barrier communication is important for drug delivery. The gut-blood-brain barrier connection is particularly interesting. Inflammation in your gut can affect blood-brain barrier permeability. Lipopolysaccharide from gut bacteria can trigger inflammatory signals that reach the brain and alter blood-brain barrier function. This is one mechanism by which gut health might affect brain health. Your gut microbiome and gut barrier are communicating with your blood-brain barrier. Exercise affects blood-brain barrier function positively. Physical activity promotes blood-brain barrier health, possibly through effects on endothelial cells and reduced inflammation. Regular exercise might help maintain the integrity of this crucial communication interface between body and brain. The blood-brain barrier also has a transport system for removing waste from your brain. The glymphatic system, which is most active during sleep, clears metabolic waste from brain tissue. This waste crosses the blood-brain barrier into blood vessels for elimination by your liver and kidneys. The communication between your brain's cleaning system, the blood-brain barrier, and your liver's detoxification system is crucial for brain health. As you age, some of your cells enter a state called senescence. These are cells that have stopped dividing but haven't died. They're just sitting there, metabolically active but no longer proliferating. And it turns out these senescent cells have a huge impact on organ crosstalk throughout your body through the inflammatory signals they produce. Understanding senescent cell communication is key to understanding aging and age-related diseases. Cells become senescent for various reasons. Telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, shorten each time a cell divides. When telomeres get too short, cells stop dividing and become senescent. DNA damage from oxidative stress, toxins, or radiation can also trigger senescence. It's actually a protective mechanism. Senescence prevents damaged cells from dividing and potentially becoming cancerous. Better to shut down division than risk uncontrolled growth. Young, healthy tissues have very few senescent cells, and your immune system generally clears them away. But as you age, senescent cells accumulate because there are more triggers causing senescence, and your immune system becomes less efficient at clearing these cells. The accumulation of senescent cells throughout your organs has system-wide effects. The main way senescent cells affect organ crosstalk is through what's called the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SASP. Senescent cells secrete dozens of inflammatory cytokines, growth factors, and matrix remodeling enzymes into their local environment. It's like they're broadcasting a distress signal to surrounding tissues. This makes sense for a few senescent cells. Those signals help recruit immune cells to clear damaged cells and promote tissue repair. But when you have lots of senescent cells throughout your body, the chronic inflammatory signaling becomes harmful. Let's trace how senescent cells affect different organs. In your adipose tissue, senescent fat cells produce inflammatory cytokines that contribute to insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. The senescent cells are communicating with nearby healthy fat cells, immune cells, and even distant organs through circulating inflammatory signals. As senescent cells accumulate in fat tissue with aging, they worsen metabolic health. In your blood vessels, senescent endothelial cells and smooth muscle cells lose their normal function and produce inflammatory signals that promote atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaques in arteries. These senescent cells are essentially communicating with immune cells and other vascular cells in ways that accelerate cardiovascular disease. The crosstalk between senescent cells and the immune system drives chronic vascular inflammation. Your liver also accumulates senescent cells with aging, and these cells contribute to liver fibrosis and reduced liver function. Senescent liver cells produce factors that activate hepatic stellate cells, causing them to lay down scar tissue. The communication between senescent cells and other liver cells changes the architecture of the liver and impairs its function as the metabolic regulator of your body. Even your brain isn't immune. Senescent cells accumulate in the aging brain, particularly among glial cells, the support cells that maintain the brain environment. These senescent glial cells produce inflammatory factors that can damage neurons and contribute to cognitive decline. The communication between senescent cells and neurons is neurotoxic, contributing to age-related neurodegeneration. Senescent cells in your skeletal muscle contribute to sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss. The inflammatory signals from senescent cells interfere with muscle regeneration and promote muscle protein breakdown. The crosstalk between senescent cells, muscle stem cells, and muscle fibers disrupts the normal repair and maintenance of muscle tissue. Your bones also suffer from senescent cell accumulation. Senescent cells in bone marrow and bone tissue disrupt the balance between bone-building osteoblasts and bone-breaking osteoclasts, contributing to osteoporosis. They're sending signals that shift the communication balance in your skeletal system toward bone loss. Here's what's particularly insidious. Senescent cells can actually induce senescence in nearby normal cells through the inflammatory factors they secrete. It's a self-propagating phenomenon called secondary senescence or bystander senescence. One senescent cell can create more senescent cells around it, spreading dysfunction through tissues. This communication between senescent and normal cells amplifies the problem over time. The immune system's relationship with senescent cells is complex. On one hand, immune cells are supposed to recognize and clear senescent cells. This is called immunosurveillance. Natural killer cells and macrophages can detect senescent cells and eliminate them. But with aging, immune function declines, and senescent cells start accumulating faster than the immune system can clear them. Paradoxically, the inflammatory signals from senescent cells actually contribute to immune system aging. The chronic inflammation from accumulated senescent cells, called inflammaging, keeps the immune system in a constant state of low-level activation. This chronic activation exhausts immune cells and impairs their function. It's a vicious cycle. Weakened immunity allows senescent cells to accumulate, and accumulated senescent cells further weaken immunity through inflammatory crosstalk. Recent research has focused on senolytic therapies, drugs that selectively kill senescent cells. Studies in mice have shown that clearing senescent cells can improve health span, reduce age-related diseases, and even extend lifespan. This is a direct test of whether senescent cell communication is driving aging. The results so far are promising. Removing senescent cells improves the crosstalk between organs and tissues throughout the body. We've talked a lot about hormones as communication signals between organs, but we haven't fully explored what happens at the receiving end. How organs respond to hormones isn't just about how much hormone is circulating. It's also about how many receptors are present, how sensitive those receptors are, and how the intracellular signaling machinery is working. This receptor-level crosstalk determines how organs interpret and respond to hormonal messages. Every hormone works by binding to specific receptors on or in target cells. Think of hormones as keys and receptors as locks. The hormone key must fit the receptor lock for the signal to be transmitted into the cell. But unlike actual locks, hormone receptors can be regulated. Cells can make more receptors, fewer receptors, or change how responsive the receptors are. This gives organs control over how loudly they hear different hormone signals. Let's use insulin as an example. Insulin receptors are present on cell surfaces in your muscles, liver, and fat tissue. When insulin binds to its receptor, it triggers a cascade of intracellular signals that ultimately move glucose transporters to the cell surface, allowing glucose uptake. But the number and sensitivity of insulin receptors varies between tissues and changes in response to various conditions. In insulin resistance, the receptors are still there, but they're not responding properly to insulin's signal. This can happen through several mechanisms. Sometimes the receptors themselves are modified. Maybe they're phosphorylated in ways that make them less responsive. Sometimes the problem is downstream in the signaling cascade. The receptor binds insulin fine, but the intracellular machinery that's supposed to respond isn't working right. Either way, the cell isn't hearing the insulin signal properly, even though insulin is knocking on the door. What causes this reduced receptor sensitivity? Often it's the result of other crosstalk signals. Inflammatory cytokines from fat tissue can interfere with insulin signaling. Free fatty acids in the blood can activate pathways that inhibit insulin receptor signaling. Chronic elevated insulin levels themselves can cause receptor downregulation. When insulin is constantly high, cells reduce their insulin receptors as a protective mechanism. This is called receptor desensitization, or downregulation. The same principles apply to other hormones. Thyroid hormone receptors exist in multiple forms, alpha and beta isoforms, and different tissues express different ratios of these receptor types. Your heart has mostly beta receptors, which makes it very responsive to thyroid hormone. This is why hyperthyroidism so strongly affects heart rate. The tissue-specific receptor expression determines how different organs respond to the same circulating thyroid hormone levels. Estrogen receptors come in two main types, ER-alpha and ER-beta, with different tissue distributions and different effects when activated. Breast tissue and the uterus have mainly ER-alpha receptors. Bone has both types. The brain has both types in different regions. This means estrogen has different effects in different organs, not just because of concentration differences, but because the receptor machinery is different. The same hormone molecule is having completely different conversations in different tissues. Cortisol receptors are another interesting example. Almost every cell in your body has cortisol receptors, which makes sense given cortisol's role as a stress hormone affecting the whole body. But the density of receptors and the intracellular response varies by tissue. Your immune cells are very sensitive to cortisol, which is why cortisol suppresses immunity. Your hippocampus in your brain also has many cortisol receptors, which is why chronic stress and elevated cortisol can affect memory and mood. Receptor regulation is also time-dependent. Many hormone receptors show circadian variation in their expression or sensitivity. Your cells might be more responsive to certain hormones at certain times of day. This adds a temporal dimension to organ crosstalk. The same hormone signal can have different effects depending on when it arrives. Receptor crosstalk is also important. Sometimes activation of one receptor affects another receptor's function. Growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor receptors influence insulin receptor signaling. Activation of certain immune receptors can affect steroid hormone receptor function. The conversations between different signaling pathways within cells create incredibly complex information processing. Some tissues can convert hormones to more or less active forms locally, which is another layer of crosstalk regulation. We mentioned earlier that T4 is converted to T3 in peripheral tissues. Testosterone can be converted to estrogen by aromatase enzyme in various tissues. This means testosterone's effects can differ between tissues, partly based on whether they express aromatase. In men, some of testosterone's effects on bone density are actually through local conversion to estrogen in bone tissue. The same circulating hormone is being interpreted differently by different organs based on their enzymatic equipment. Medications that target hormone receptors take advantage of this organ-specific receptor expression. Selective estrogen receptor modulators, or SERMs, can act as estrogen agonists in some tissues and antagonists in others. Tamoxifen blocks estrogen receptors in breast tissue but activates them in bone. This tissue selectivity comes from differences in receptor subtypes and co-regulatory proteins. Most discussions of organ crosstalk focus on chemical signals, hormones, cytokines, neurotransmitters. But your body also communicates through mechanical forces, and the fascia network is a key player in this mechanical communication system that we're only beginning to appreciate. Fascia is the connective tissue that surrounds and connects every structure in your body. Your organs, muscles, bones, nerves, and blood vessels are all wrapped in and connected by fascial tissue. It's essentially a body-wide web of collagen and elastin fibers embedded in a gel-like matrix. For a long time, anatomists and doctors viewed fascia as just inert packing material, something to cut through to get to the important structures underneath. But research over the past couple decades has revealed that fascia is an active, sensory tissue that plays important roles in communication between body parts. Fascia is mechanosensitive. It contains cells called fibroblasts that can detect mechanical strain and tension. When you move, stretch, or apply pressure to your body, the fascia deforms, and fibroblasts sense this deformation. These cells respond by producing signaling molecules and by remodeling the extracellular matrix, changing the stiffness and structure of the fascial tissue. This mechanical sensing creates a form of communication between different body parts. When you move one part of your body, that movement transmits through the fascial network, creating subtle changes in tension throughout your body. Your fascial system is essentially a web of mechanical communication that connects your entire body. Let's consider how this works with muscles. When you contract a muscle, you're not just generating force at the tendons that attach to bone. The muscle is also pulling on the fascia that surrounds it, and that tension transmits through fascial connections to other muscles and structures. This is one reason why tightness in one area can affect movement in seemingly unrelated areas. The calf muscles, hamstrings, back muscles, and neck muscles are all connected through fascial chains, so restriction in one area creates compensatory changes elsewhere through mechanical communication. The plantar fascia on the bottom of your foot connects through fascial lines all the way up to your lower back. This is why plantar fasciitis sometimes involves or is affected by issues in the calves or even the lower back. The mechanical signals are traveling through the fascial network, and problems in one region affect tension patterns in connected regions. Fascia is also richly innervated with sensory nerves. It contains more sensory nerve endings than muscles do. This means fascia is constantly sending information to your brain about body position, movement, and the mechanical state of tissues. This proprioceptive information helps coordinate movement and maintain posture. Your fascia is communicating with your nervous system about the mechanical status of your body. When fascia becomes restricted through injury, inflammation, poor posture, or lack of movement, it can't transmit mechanical forces properly. Restricted fascia becomes stiffer and less hydrated. The cells within it start producing more collagen in a disorganized way, creating adhesions. This affects mechanical communication through the fascial network, potentially contributing to pain and movement dysfunction in areas far from the restriction. Fascia also plays a role in coordinating muscle function. The fascial connections between muscles create functional chains or myofascial meridians that work together during movement. When you walk, muscles throughout your body activate in coordinated patterns, partly through fascial connections that help transmit and coordinate forces. The fascia is mechanically communicating between muscles to create integrated movement. Recent research has found that fascia contains contractile cells, meaning fascia itself can generate tension independently of muscle contraction. These myofibroblasts respond to autonomic nervous system signals and can adjust fascial tension. This suggests fascia isn't just passively transmitting forces. It's actively regulating mechanical communication in response to neural signals. The relationship between fascia and organs is also important. Each organ is surrounded by fascia, and restrictions in the fascial layers around an organ can affect organ function. The fascia around your lungs, for instance, needs to be pliable for normal breathing. Restrictions here can contribute to breathing difficulties. Fascial restrictions around your abdominal organs can affect their mobility and potentially contribute to digestive issues. Fascia also plays a role in inflammation and immune function. When tissues are injured, inflammatory signals affect fascia, causing fibroblasts to produce more collagen and remodel the matrix. This is part of the healing response, but excessive or prolonged inflammation can lead to fascial adhesions and chronic restrictions. The communication between the immune system and fascial tissue affects long-term tissue mechanics. Manual therapies like myofascial release, rolfing, and certain forms of massage work by affecting fascial tissue. The mechanical input from these therapies can change fascial hydration, reduce adhesions, and affect the sensory signals the fascia sends to the nervous system. This is mechanical crosstalk being manipulated therapeutically. Exercise affects fascial health. Movement and stretching maintain fascial hydration and proper fiber alignment. Lack of movement causes fascia to become restricted and dehydrated. The mechanical stimulation from exercise is a crucial signal that maintains healthy fascial tissue throughout the body. Understanding fascial crosstalk is changing how we think about body-wide symptoms and syndromes. Conditions like fibromyalgia might involve dysregulation of fascial mechanosensing and signaling. Chronic pain syndromes might be partly due to altered mechanical communication through the fascial network. We're just beginning to appreciate how mechanical communication through fascia integrates with chemical and neural signaling to coordinate body function. We've journeyed through dozens of examples of organ crosstalk, from your gut talking to your brain, to your liver coordinating metabolism, to senescent cells affecting tissues throughout your body. But the big picture is even more remarkable than any individual example. Your body is a network of networks, with chemical, electrical, and mechanical signals, creating an integrated system where everything affects everything else. What's revolutionary about modern understanding of organ crosstalk is the realization that diseases rarely affect just one organ in isolation. When one organ becomes dysfunctional, the disrupted crosstalk ripples throughout the entire system. Type 2 diabetes isn't just a pancreas problem. It involves disrupted communication between your pancreas, liver, muscles, fat tissue, gut, and brain. Cardiovascular disease involves your heart, kidneys, blood vessels, immune system, and more. Cancer cells manipulate crosstalk with surrounding tissues, immune cells, and distant organs to survive and spread. This systems-level understanding is changing medicine. We're moving away from the old model of treating organs in isolation toward a more integrated approach. Cardiologists now consider kidney function, inflammatory markers, and metabolic health. Gastroenterologists are interested in brain-gut interactions and the microbiome. Endocrinologists think about how hormones affect multiple organ systems. Medicine is slowly catching up to the biological reality that everything is connected. The crosstalk concept also explains why lifestyle factors like diet, exercise, stress, and sleep have such profound effects on health. These aren't just affecting one organ. They're changing the communication patterns throughout your entire body. When you exercise, you're not just building muscle. You're changing how your muscles talk to your liver and fat tissue. You're affecting microbiome composition. You're influencing hormone production. You're modifying inflammatory signaling. You're adjusting insulin sensitivity across multiple tissues. You're improving mitochondrial function in cells throughout your body. One behavior change triggers cascading effects through numerous crosstalk networks. Understanding crosstalk also reveals why personalized medicine makes sense. The same disease, say obesity, can arise from different patterns of disrupted crosstalk in different people. One person might have obesity driven primarily by gut microbiome issues affecting appetite and metabolism. Another might have leptin resistance as the core problem. A third might have thyroid or cortisol issues affecting metabolic rate. The end result looks similar, but the underlying crosstalk disruptions are different, which means the most effective interventions might differ. Looking toward the future, several emerging areas of research are expanding our understanding of organ crosstalk. Extracellular vesicles and exosomes are revealing that almost every cell type can package up signals and send them to distant cells. We're discovering new hormones and signaling molecules regularly. The most recent addition to the endocrine system was the recognition that bones produce hormones, something we didn't know until this century. Multi-omics approaches, combining genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and other data, are allowing scientists to map crosstalk networks in unprecedented detail. We can now track how a signal in one organ leads to changes in gene expression, protein production, and metabolite levels in other organs. These systems biology approaches are revealing crosstalk connections we never suspected. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are helping make sense of the enormous complexity of organ crosstalk. With thousands of signaling molecules and billions of potential interactions, human brains alone can't integrate all the information. AI systems can identify patterns and predict how perturbations in one part of the network will affect other parts. This could revolutionize drug development. Instead of targeting one pathway in isolation, we could design interventions that beneficially alter entire crosstalk networks. The microbiome is still a frontier. We're learning that bacteria throughout your body, not just in your gut, are participating in organ crosstalk. Your skin microbiome, oral microbiome, and even lung microbiome are sending signals that affect local and systemic function. And we're just beginning to explore fungi and viruses as participants in these communication networks. Chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms, is revealing that organ crosstalk has a temporal dimension we didn't fully appreciate. Most organs have circadian clocks that cycle gene expression over 24 hours, and these clocks need to be synchronized with each other and with environmental time cues. Disrupted circadian crosstalk might be a fundamental driver of many modern diseases. The concept of organ crosstalk also offers hope for regenerative medicine and aging research. If we can understand how organs communicate during development and healing, we might be able to trigger regenerative responses in adults. If we can restore youthful patterns of organ crosstalk, perhaps by clearing senescent cells, modifying the microbiome, or adjusting hormone profiles, we might be able to extend health span. As we close this journey through organ crosstalk, the key takeaway is this: you are not a collection of separate parts. You are an integrated system where every organ, tissue, and cell is in constant communication with every other. The conversations happening inside your body right now, between your gut and brain, your fat and liver, your muscles and bones, your immune cells and organs throughout your body, these conversations determine your health, your mood, your energy, your resilience to disease, and ultimately how well and how long you live. Understanding organ crosstalk transforms how we see ourselves and our health. Take care of one part of your body, and the benefits ripple throughout the system through crosstalk networks. Likewise, neglect or damage to one part affects everything else. You are an interconnected whole, and that's both humbling and empowering. Sweet dreams.